If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. The exploration of space will go ahead, whether we join in it or not. And it is one of the great adventures of all time. And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space. Those who came before us made certain that this country rode the first waves of the Industrial Revolution, the first waves of modern invention, and the first wave of nuclear power. And this generation does not intend to founder in the backwash of the coming age of space. We mean to be a part of it. We mean to lead it. For the eyes of the world now look into space, to the moon, and to the planets beyond. And we have vowed that we shall not see it governed by a hostile flag of conquest, but by a banner of freedom and peace. We have vowed that we shall not see space filled with weapons of mass destruction, but with instruments of knowledge and understanding. Yet the vows of this nation can only be fulfilled if we in this nation are first, and therefore we intend to be first. But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Welcome, everybody, to this special episode of Brownsville Tech Live. And tonight, we've got a special show. We're covering the live launching of Artemis 1, America's return back to the moon. And as expected, Murphy's Law always strikes. And two things have occurred tonight. I'm waiting for my co-host to actually pop in. But while we wait for him, there also has been a setback in the launch window. Apparently, there has been a valve leak. They have sent a red team onto the launch pad, and they are trying to plug up the leak by tightening some bolts. I know that they have sent the team in. They've tightened the bolts, but it is still not clear whether that was successful or not. The launch actually may be delayed by maybe an hour. So instead of launching here at 11, which would be 11 Central, it may be 12 or 1 o'clock in the morning Central Time. But once again, while we wait for our co-host to pop in, I'll go ahead and flip the NASA live cam on to try to get some additional feedback of what's going on. So hang on, stay tuned, and we'll watch what's going on over at NASA with regards to that leak.
Support our use with the Artemis program. Today's flight director is Judd Freeling, a flight director of 11 years who will lead the team through the ascent portion of the mission. After Freeling's shift today, flight director Rick LeBreau will lead the team through the rest of the mission all the way to entry and splashdown when Freeling will step in again.
Looks a lot different.
Other console members will be monitoring the
Apollo
various
era.
systems on Orion like propulsion, solar arrays, and trajectory, and they arrived on console about 5 hours ago. And you might also be surprised to learn that there is indeed a Capcom or capsule communicator on console today as well. While there are no crew on board, Jay Marshke and other capsule communicators will be training throughout the mission in preparation for Artemis 2 and beyond. The Capcom is the single person in the room who speaks with the crew, gathering info from mission control team and keeping streamlined communication with the astronauts in space. We're counting down to liftoff when teams here will really jump into action and monitor the first Artemis flight, sending Orion further than any crew-rated spacecraft has gone before. But for now, Megan and Kayla will send it back to you at Kennedy Space Center to keep walking us through the events of the day.
Well, you just heard Leah remind us that no one is inside Orion today. Again, it's because Artemis 1 is a flight test to prove we can safely return crew from lunar orbit on Artemis 2. And when we launch the first crewed mission, NASA has a very diverse and talented core to choose from, including Kayla here. We're looking at video now of some of your friends who got to go to the pad. That looks fun.
Yeah, it's always so exciting to see the rocket on the pad because you know you're getting close to launch. So we're all just really excited to see how this test goes today.
I wish I could have gone out there with them. You and me, what happened? We didn't get our invite. And I thought this was fun too. Some of your friends also got to fly over the pad in T-38s. Here's video of that now, incredible video. So these flyovers were common during shuttle, right?
Yeah, and we still try to do them whenever we can. We actually use the T-38 jet as a training platform. It's a chance for us to practice making real-world decisions in a high-risk environment, practice working as a team, and a good analog for spaceflight.
Okay.
But we also like to fly by the pad when we can, when we have a rocket out there. It's a way of saluting and thanking the team for all the work it took to get to this moment.
That's great. Yeah, a worthwhile thing to do because, yes, the team has worked so hard to get to this moment. And you spoke about training. Has training already started for Artemis 2 for you guys?
We've been developing the training, but the crews aren't assigned yet, so they're not in dedicated training flows yet. But our team at Johnson Space Center, where we train for human spaceflight, are working on all of the things that we're going to need to teach the crew and the best ways to go about that. Once we get that crew assigned, they'll be straight into training right up until launch day.
Awesome. Cool, cool, cool. All right, I can't wait to hear who gets assigned. And the absence of crew today doesn't mean Orion is empty. There are plenty of other interesting things flying on Artemis 1, including several technology
Welcome,
demonstrations and
Mr.
science
Villarreal.
investigations we're going to show you throughout the broadcast.
Glad
there are
to
also
have
some
you on
mementos
today.
like these seeds that we have right here, right, Kayla?
Yeah, we have an example of the moon seeds that will be flying as part of this mission today. And the idea actually comes from an Apollo 14 astronaut, Stuart Roosa, who flew seeds with him to the moon, hundreds of them, and then brought them back to Earth. And then they were planted all over the country and the world, and they're called moon trees. And so we're kind of carrying on with that idea on Orion for this launch.
Yeah, I love that. And the seeds that are flying on Artemis 1, it's going to come back and they're going to distribute it to a number of organizations through NASA's STEM program. So it's really a neat idea. And so these moon seeds are part of what's inside Artemis 1's official flight kit, along with more than 10,000 other mementos, like this Apollo 8 commemorative medal you see here, a nod to 1968 when humans first orbited the moon, and a bolt from Apollo 11, 1969, when humans first landed on the moon. Those items are on loan to us from the National Air and Space Museum, and once back on Earth,
1 hour
will be
and
exhibited there, so you
28
can check them
minutes
out.
before launch.
There are also a variety of flags, pins, and patches like these Artemis
like we
1
said,
patches
there
that will be
is
distributed
a
to people
valve
who
leak.
contributed to this flight.
They have a
Now, NASA
red
spacecraft,
team
both crewed and uncrewed, have carried mementos
inside
like these since the
launch
1960s.
pad, launch
Astronauts are also
39B
allowed
right
their own
now.
personal flight kits, so I was
They're
wondering, what did you bring with
trying
you
to
for
tighten up
your
some
Crew 3
bolts
mission?
to see
I
if
actually brought a
that
couple of
stops the
examples
leak.
to show you. The moon seeds inspired me to share that. I actually brought some vegetables.
That's
Oh,
the
that's
latest
awesome.
right now.
So these are
with
kind of fun.
regards
They're
to
dragon
where
themed. So I got
the
dragon carrots,
launch
and dragon beans.
is.
I went up on
I've
SpaceX
lowered
for
the
dragon
audio
beans.
on the video.
And then of course, I think the most
But
important
right
and
now,
meaningful thing
the
to all of
launch
us
is
usually
still
pictures of our family
on
and friends.
schedule
So,
for 1
how many
hour
people
and
there?
20
Like, me and my
minutes
family
or
at my
27
sister's
minutes from now.
wedding,
But once
friends
again,
backpacking
the
in Alberta, Canada,
Murphy's
and then
Law
my-
has
my
struck,
in-laws.
and there is a valve leak.
Together on a
So
family vacation,
hopefully
and I
they'll
also
be able to
brought some
fix it
flags,
by
some
tightening
American
up
flags,
some
and then
bolts.
United States Navy flags,
And,
since I'm a naval officer. So things like that, I think
then
it's
they'll
just so human to wanna
hopefully
bring stuff with you,
launch the
right?
rocket.
Souvenirs, who doesn't love that?
They will
Yeah.
have
I think for
to
most of us, yeah, pictures
bleed
of
the
our family and friends, things
engines
that
and a
connect
few
us
other
back home are
things.
the most important.
So
Yeah, you know,
we're
6 months
possibly
might not
looking
sound like
at
long
a
time for
late
people, but it is, right? When you say you're also
launch,
so far, it's nice to have those
a late
tangible
morning
things to remind you
launch.
of home.
The
Absolutely.
window
Yeah, really
extends
hard for us.
from
Cool. Thank you for
11
explaining that. It was really fun
a.m.
to look
all
at.
the
All
way
right, 1 hour,
to
27 minutes and counting until
3 o'clock in the
launch,
morning.
and we have our
So
first questions from social media. So let's
we'll
take a
know
look at the
pretty
first here.
soon
Here you're
if
gonna notice a
the
familiar,
launch will
handstand
continue
face.
on schedule or whether it will be
Hey there, I'm
slightly
Chris Evans, and I
delayed
play Buzz Lightyear in
or
Pixar's
whether
Lightyear.
it will
I was
be
wondering, when we fly
postponed
future Artemis
for
missions with
another
astronauts,
day.
how many people can fly on board the
So
Orion capsule
one of the
at once?
things
My
that
nephew's probably asleep, but he's a
is
big Buzz Lightyear
kind of
fan, so
interesting
we're
about
probably gonna
this
enjoy watching
rocket
that question tomorrow.
is
We can get
it
4
is
astronauts in
fairly
the Orion space
different
capsule.
from
It's
the
about- it's a little bit bigger than the
Apollo
Apollo
era Saturn V rockets. One of the things that it's different. Let me bring up a graphic here. If you give me a second, give me a second here while I pull up the graphic. Yeah, so basically this is the Artemis moon rocket. It is different from the Saturn V in several aspects. First of all, the rocket is comprised of a main stage as well as 2 solid rocket boosters. And if you remember, or it looks familiar, these solid rocket boosters were also part of the shuttle program. So they've been around since 1976. Actually, I was only like 4 years old back then. So I never got to see any of the Apollo program. It was way before my time. I mean, first of all, I wasn't even born I wasn't even alive in 1969, so I didn't get to see any of it. But basically, for the shuttle, it was powered by the solid rocket boosters. And if you recall, in 1986, one of the O-rings in one of these solid rocket boosters actually expanded due to the cold weather. And as a result, there was leakage of the material, which caused an explosion and the loss of the Space Shuttle Challenger, along with the 7 astronauts, including America's first teacher in space, Krista McAuliffe. So these are the same rocket boosters that were used in the shuttle program. The main rocket is powered by 4 RS-25 engines. Those engines also are part of the shuttle program. They are the engines that powered the actual space shuttle. I think the space shuttle had 3 RS-25 engines at the tail end. So those are the same engines. So this rocket is powered by 4 RS-25 engines, which are rated to thrust this rocket into not only orbit, but propel it to beyond Earth orbit towards the moon. Basically, the component of the rocket, from what was described, it is fueled by hydrogen and liquid oxygen. So the larger portion of the rocket contains hydrogen in this section here, and then just slightly above it is the liquid oxygen tank. Those fuels are chilled, and as a result of that, they're fed through lines down to the engines, which provide the fuel for the thrust. So this rocket is definitely different from the Saturn rocket of yesteryear, or the 1970s. It does borrow some space shuttle technology, but it definitely is a different kind of rocket. So I wanted to kind of illustrate this while we wait, what this rocket is, how it's similar to what we've seen before, but then how it's different at the same time. What we'll go ahead and do is we'll go ahead and flip back to our live NASA channel, and we'll do that to see if there's been any developments, since we were on. So if you give me a second, we'll go back to NASA here. Alrighty, let's go ahead and see what's going on.
30% more habitable volume, and so instead of supporting 3 crew for about 2 weeks, Orion can support 4 crew for about 21 days.
Okay, good first question.
So one of the things the
can a microbiologist
astronaut there that's being interviewed is that the Orion capsule itself can support a crew of 4 for up to 21 days. I don't recall what the
beyond that, you can come from any
length
pathway. So
of stay was on the Apollo capsule, but I believe it was probably 3 or 4 days max.
I love that.
So definitely there are differences. I believe it's a little roomier than what sent Neil Armstrong to the moon back in 1969. So it probably is a Cadillac compared to what was back in the 70s for some of those astronauts. I don't know how different it is from the Dragon capsule that SpaceX uses. But for those of you that have seen the SpaceX capsule, I mean, there are no dials, there are no mechanical dashboard
for the
you know,
crew to
controls.
orbit the
It's
moon on
all
Artemis 2 and
touchscreen.
see it up
So,
close. And then, of course, on Artemis 3 to actually land
you know,
on
it's
the moon
definitely
and
not
conduct a
Grandpa's
moonwalk.
space
It's just gonna be
capsule, that's for
incredible
sure.
to have that view back of our home
But
planet.
there's
So
the
just
rocket
thought of
right
humans
there.
sending human
It's
beings
on
back
launch
to the
pad
moon is super
39B.
exciting for all of us.
I honestly didn't know
Out
how
in
you're going to
Florida
answer
at
it
the
because there
Kennedy
is so
Space
many
Center.
things to look forward to pinpoint, you know, the thing that you're most
39A
excited about. I thought it was
is
gonna be a
being
hard
leased
question,
by
actually.
SpaceX for
All right, so great
Falcon
questions. Keep them coming using hashtag
9
Artemis
as
wherever you're
well as
watching this
Falcon
broadcast.
Heavy
And keep
launches.
sending those
And
moon-inspired
NASA
content
is
to, again,
using
that's hashtag NASA
launch pad
Moonsnap, and we're gonna show some of
39B
them later in the broadcast.
for its
Okay,
launches.
1 hour, 24 minutes and counting.
If you
and so
recall back
hopefully
from the
liftoff
shuttle
of Artemis
era
1,
and
it's
even
time
the
for another
Apollo
update from
era,
NASA's Bill Nell, who's with the
39A
launch team
and
as they were monitoring
39B are
Yeah, that's right, Megan.
historic
Inside,
launch
the
pads.
fire
They were
room
used
number 1
primarily
here at
for the
Launch
shuttle,
Control Center at the
as
Kennedy Space
well
Center.
as
And
launching
currently we have an update on that red crew which went out to the
the
pad
Apollo
to
astronauts.
put
There's an
down
update
some
here,
bolts
folks.
on a leaky hydrogen replenish valve for the core stage. And that update is that the red crew has departed the blast danger area. They have completed their work. They got the go at 10 p.m. this evening, 10 p.m. Eastern Time, to go out and conduct work that took roughly an hour from the time they were given the go till the time they left the blast danger area. The technicians, 2 technicians and 1 safety representative, did the work out at the pad on the replenish valve. And now that they are on their way back, the team is now examining the work and whether or not that leak is still there. What we do know is, you may have heard me mention that this put the liquid hydrogen tank into stop flow, and as a result also stopped a required 90-minute engine bleed for the liquid hydrogen side. Teams have come to the conclusion that only a 45-minute bleed is required at this point. They can resume the bleed at the point that they left off, and it'll be enough to meet that requirement for launch. You're looking now at a graphic where we're tracking the core stage fill rate. We did this earlier this evening. Took about
as
4
I mentioned
hours and 20
before,
minutes to
the
fill
rocket
the core
has
stage.
2
You can
tanks
see on the left that the
internally.
core
One
stage
is
liquid
the
oxygen
liquid
is at
hydrogen tank,
100%.
which is
That's the same for the
actually
upper
first
stage, and both are in
of that
stable
rocket.
replenish.
It
As you can look to
contains
the
a
right,
total
though,
of
you can see that we're at 97%
523,000
for liquid
gallons of
hydrogen. The
hydrogen.
reason for that is because when we went into stop
And then
flow,
the second component
that the
is the
replenish was
tank
no
that
longer,
contains the
refilling
liquid
the tank,
oxygen.
and that liquid hydrogen
That
was boiling
tank
off,
holds a total of
draining some of the
196,000
capacity
gallons
out
of
that
liquid
particular tank.
oxygen.
So we've lost some
As you
liquid
can
hydrogen.
see,
The
the
plan is to
liquid
resume,
oxygen
of
is
course,
chilled at
the
about
filling of liquid
200
hydrogen
at
that goes
minus
into that,
293
into the liquid
degrees
hydrogen tank at the core
Fahrenheit,
stage,
and
then
the
vents out
liquid
on that flare
hydrogen
stack
has
that
to
you
be
see to the right,
chilled
where
down
excess
a
hydrogen
minus
is burned off.
400
That's the latest here from Fire Room
degree
1. Megan, this will be back to
Fahrenheit.
you.
So
Thanks,
this is
Daryl.
pretty
All right, let's go
chilled
back inside our Apollo
fuel
Saturn
that
V
has
center
to
now.
happen.
NASA's Dan Hewitt. We last sent humans to the
But
moon
one of the
using
things
rocket
that you
behind
just
me. Can
heard
you show us
was
how we're
that
going back now with
typically
Artemis?
they
Absolutely.
require
Thanks,
a
Megan. So Artemis 1 is
90-minute
gonna take us from
engine
planet
bleed
Earth, around the
process.
moon, and all the way
And
back,
what they're
and I'm gonna show you
saying
every
is
step of the
that
way. Like every
they
great
can
space
shrink
mission,
that
it starts with a launch.
window
In this
of
case,
engine
4
bleed down to
RS-25
about
engines, 2 solid rocket
45
boosters ignite,
minutes.
sending SLS and
So
Orion into
that
the sky.
means
On the
that
way up
more
there, we'll
than
have a number of
likely
jettison events, things coming off the rocket.
we're
One
going to
of the
be
most
on
visible,
schedule.
These 2 large solid
But,
rocket boosters are a little over 2 minutes
You know,
into
the
flight,
gentleman
will
here is
break away. We'll
describing the
also have
solid
the launch
rocket
support system come
boosters
off
as
just
they
high enough, and
separate
then
from
3
the main
fairings, which are
stage.
protecting Orion's capsule and service module during the
So
flight
let's
to
go
the
ahead
thicker
and hear a
parts of
little
the
bit about
atmosphere.
the explanation
Now,
of
after
how
the
this
core
is
stage
going
has
to work.
consumed its propellants, we'll hear MECO, main engine cut off. Those 4 engines will cut off. The core stage will drop away, handing over propulsion duties to this, the interim cryogenic propulsion stage. Its first job is a perigee raise maneuver. Perigee just means the lowest point of your orbit. This will give us a nice circular path for Orion around our planet. While it's there, we can really check the spacecraft out, make sure everything from electrical systems, guidance, navigation, and control, communications are all functioning before we commit it to heading to the moon. And we do that with this. the trans-lunar injection. This will be about an 18-minute firing on today's timeline, and this is done to give us enough energy to get out of low Earth orbit and make our way to the moon. Shortly after that, the ICPS will separate. It'll do a disposal burn, sending it around the moon and into an orbit around the sun. But from there on out, propulsion duties get handed over to the European Service Module. It's going to make a couple of outbound trajectory correction burns on the way out, critically testing that orbital maneuvering system engine, that large one on the very bottom that's going to be needed when we start making our maneuvers around the moon to get into what's known as distant retrograde orbit, or DRO. To do that, we're going to do the outbound powered flyby, dipping in about 70 or 80 miles off the lunar surface, really pushing with that large engine. That's going to slingshot us around. We're going to do a final orbit insertion maneuver, and then we will be in DRO, distant retrograde orbit, this dotted line right here. Distant, we're about 40,000 miles off the lunar surface, and retrograde, because the moon orbits the Earth in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be going clockwise, opposite retrograde. It's a very stable orbit, doesn't require a lot of energy to maintain your space there, really lets us put Orion through the paces, learn about using this spacecraft in deep space. But eventually it'll be time to come home. We'll fire up the engines once more, do a departure burn. This is what commits us from departing the moon and heading back home. We'll dip in close to the surface once more for the return powered flyby and execute correction burns on the return transit as we target a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean. Before that happens, the spacecraft separate. The European Service Module's job is done. It drops away to burn up, revealing the heat shield. This is goal number one for this flight, is testing that heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we hit the upper atmosphere, we're going to be moving more than 20,000 miles an hour, heating that up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So really need to make sure that that can withstand that heat of re-entry. After it makes it through, parachutes deploy, Orion splashes down in the Pacific, a Navy ship and other recovery assets are standing by to pick it up out of the water and bring it in to the first mission in the Artemis program. So that's all still going to unfold. It all starts with launch today, though, so let's get back to the countdown. Over to you, Megan.
Our return to the moon would not be possible without our partners across the country and the world. So joining us now is Frank Davina, head of ESA's European Astronaut Center. Good evening to you.
Good evening.
Well, so I want to ask you, talk to me about Airbus and how that company and ESA contributed to the Orion spacecraft.
Well, Airbus is of course the lead manufacturer and integrator of the service module of our Orion capsule, and that will fly to the moon. So this is a very important part, of course, because without the service module, it's clear that we would not get to the moon or would not be able to return from it. So it's a very important partner for ESA, but there are industries across Europe, not only Airbus, but across Europe, that are contributing to the service module in Italy, in France, Belgium. Really, it's a really European project.
Yeah.
Frank, we've been close partners, NASA and the European Space Agency, for decades now, and partnering on things like the space station, scientific exploration, and of course commercial crew missions. Matthias Maurer, ESA astronaut extraordinaire, was on my crew, Crew 3. Can you tell us a little bit more about what makes these partnerships so important?
Well, it's important, these partnerships, because we want to do sustainable exploration of the moon. We want to explore space on a sustainable way. And I think partnerships in that sense are essential. One nation alone, could they do it? The US maybe, yes. Europe certainly could not participate to a lunar program by themselves, or could not do it by themselves. But I think if we do it as a partnership, we can go a lot further, we can do a lot more. We can leverage technologies, we can leverage talent in all these countries across the globe that can really push the partnership forward.
So looking ahead to future Artemis missions, we're going to have ESA astronauts on board those. Have you guys begun preparing for that training, anything like that?
We have actually started preparing already for lunar missions, surface missions. We have a program called Pangea in ESA, which is basically, there are NASA astronauts participating in those trainings. Stephanie was just over with us just 1 week ago, doing field trips, and we are actually starting to prepare to see also which technologies do we need to use that we can at the best possible way do science on the moon, because of course we just do not go there to walk around or do two things. We want to do real science, we want to do discoveries, we want to live there for a sustainable way. So which technologies do we need? And that we are actually starting already in the European Astronaut Center. We actually started already more than 5 years ago developing this training program. So yes, we are involved again together with our NASA colleagues and colleagues from the international partners to start preparing crew to really do sustainable surface exploration of the moon.
Yeah. And you guys are doing more than just crew, right? You guys are contributing to the Artemis programs in other ways?
We are contributing to the Artemis program in many ways. Of course, the service module that we will see launching here hopefully today is the biggest part today. But we are looking into a lot of other capabilities. First of all, there is the gateway. That will be a real element to enable the sustainable exploration of the moon. We have the communication system on the gateway, we have the IHAP, the habitation module, we have Esprit, which is a refueling module, which is essential if you want to sustain the gateway there for a longer period of time. Of course, you need to be able to refuel the system. So these are essential elements, again, that ESA is providing. We're also providing small technology experiments. Radiation, for example, will be very important. We are looking in crew exercise device for the gateway. We are looking into medical systems. So these are also small components, but for the crew that are very important, because we need to keep the crew healthy there, of course.
You're a great partner. You have so much that you're contributing. We really appreciate it.
We have a lot that we can contribute. And,
Thank you.
And of course in this ministerial, because we have now our ministerial conference coming up next week, where the big decisions are going to be made for the next decade. And there we will propose a European lander that will bring logistics to the moon. And this logistics capability that will be a big part of the integrated Artemis program will allow us to have European astronauts actually walking on the moon. So that is really interesting for us.
Wow, Frank, thank you so much. And we continue to look forward to the contributions that we can make together with this partnership. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And good morning to the viewers in Europe.
Thank you so much. All right, and speaking of viewers, we have a ton of people out here on along the space coast of Florida watching today's launch. So let's head on over to NASA's Leah Martin. She's over at the Visitor Center with a whole bunch of excited people.
Oh my goodness, Megan. You know, this normally is a time of night that people are winding down and getting ready for bed, but there is not a single person here who has sleep on their mind. Everybody is so excited, on the edge of their seat, trading stories, talking about previous launches and being excited for this one. And I'm actually joined here by 3 women who are thrilled to come out and watch tonight's launch. What does it mean to be out here and see this historic launch tonight?
It's an amazing moment. I grew up on the Space Coast watching launches, and so to be out here tonight, it's incredible. It's an amazing feeling to be out with all of these people celebrating, and we're super excited to be here.
And Isabel, I know that you said that you have been having your eyes on this launch. You've been watching on the previous attempts. What does it mean for you to be here tonight?
Well, yeah, this is our 3rd attempt here. We were here for the 1st and 2nd here at Banana Creek, so we're really excited. The energy out here is electrifying, and we can't wait to see this thing go off.
Now, this is the first of a series of missions that are becoming increasingly more complex. What are you most excited about for the Artemis missions?
Leah, I am so excited to be here. I just feel so honored because, as you know, this isn't just a momentous launch for humanity as a whole. It's so important for gender and cultural minorities across the globe because Artemis is landing the first woman and the first person of color on the surface of the moon. This is this generation's Apollo. And so all of the people who didn't have the opportunity to live through Apollo and be inspired by that have the opportunity today to witness it. And I'm just so grateful to be here. I can't wait to see the positive impact.
One more question. This is going to be something that you guys, I'm sure, will remember for your entire lives. How are you marking this? Do you have any special plans of capturing these memories and being able to pass them on to people in your life?
Well, my son is growing up here. I didn't grow up here, and so he's going to grow up here on the Space Coast, and I just can't wait for him to just grow up with the Artemis missions.
Well, Megan, we're out here. We have our eye to the sky, and we can't wait to see it go. Back to you.
Really great interviews, and wow, I saw that drone shot that we had showing all of the bleachers filled with people there to watch the launch. That was incredible. If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's live launch coverage of Artemis 1, our return to the moon in almost 50 years. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron, who flew on NASA's SpaceX Crew 3 mission and returned home earlier this year after living and working on the International Space Station for about 6 months. I gotta ask you, how was that experience?
It was incredible. We had such an amazing time up there. The Expedition 66 crew was awesome. I've been saying since I got back that we're the happiest crew in the history of the space station, and nobody's been able to really challenge me on that yet.
You guys look very happy in that photo.
Oh man, we were just like a family up there executing an incredible mission. Some amazing science experiments. We got to do 3 spacewalks. It was just, you couldn't have planned a perfect first mission for me, Matthias, and Raja, and of course our veterans up there, Mark and Tom. It was amazing. We had an incredible time.
Yeah. Wow, look at that photo of you in the cupola. That is amazing.
Yeah, the views are beautiful. It's just like every time you look out the window, it takes your breath away.
Wow. And now here you are, adding some valuable insight into Artemis 1. This is our 3rd opportunity to launch NASA's brand new Space Launch System rocket and Orion spacecraft. This is an uncrewed flight test to pave the way for future crewed missions, starting with Artemis 2. And Kayla, you could be chosen to fly on some of those future missions. How does that make you feel?
Honestly, it's a little unbelievable to me. I could barely imagine what it'd be like to go to the space station until I did it. And just thinking about what it would be like to look back at the Earth from orbit around the moon or even standing on the moon kind of blows my mind.
Wow.
So yeah, it's hard to even imagine that that's true, but it's a really special time to be at NASA, and an even more special time to be in the astronaut office.
Yeah, that's a beautiful picture of you seeing the moon, right?
Yeah, that's a sort of a moon
folks,
spotting
we're
adventure
back.
there. I've
We're
got
here waiting to
binoculars.
see
One
what
thing that's really cool about
transpires.
seeing stars and the moon from orbit is you're not looking at them through the atmosphere, so you get these very clear views. And the moon is always super spherical. You never get these sort of slices that look kind of flat from Earth. Up there, you see it in 3D. It feels like.
Wow.
So yeah, I think we all sort
They
of
sent
fall
the
in love
red
with the
team
moon
in
from space
to
in a whole new way.
Yeah. Well, today's launch
repair
comes amid
the
a very
actual
busy
leak.
year for us at NASA. Some
They
of the
had to go
highlights
down
include
to the
2
launch
more
pad,
commercial
39A.
launches with SpaceX,
There's the
2 Foreign
astronauts
crew
right
seen
there.
And Crew 5 last
Oh,
month.
actually, that
In May,
was,
NASA and Boeing
sorry,
flew
that's a
OST-2, the
SpaceX
second
rocket.
uncrewed flight test of the Starliner capsule. The goal is to certify the capsule for regular flights to the International Space Station after a crewed flight test next year. In July, we released the first images captured by our James Webb Space Telescope, and wow, they are magnificent. Pictures like these
Look
can
at
help
those
us
pictures
answer
from
some of
James Webb.
astronomy's biggest questions about
For
how
those
our
of you that
universe
haven't
began.
had an
And
opportunity,
then in September, we
there's an
intentionally
organization
slammed the DART
locally
spacecraft
called the
into
South
asteroid
Texas
Dimorphos
Astronomical
and successfully
Society.
changed its course. The
And
asteroid wasn't
basically
headed
they
for Earth, that's
hold
important to say,
every
but the test
quarter,
was to show that we could defend our planet if needed. And recently,
astronomy
2
at
other
the
missions
park
that
at
benefit
the
the Artemis
Resaca
program. Last
de
week,
la
we tested
Palma
a new
State
inflatable
Park.
heat shield
There
that can help
is
us
a
eventually
few
land humans on
space
Mars.
observatory
And just 2 days ago,
telescopes down
Capstone
there.
arrived at its intended orbit around
It's
the
a
moon.
fun
The small satellite launched from New Zealand in June and will now
event
test the
that you can
unique
take your
lunar
kids
orbit
as
for
well
a
as yourself
future
to
space
learn
station there. You
a
heard us
little
talk about
bit
a gateway.
about
Now, Kayla, what do
astronomy,
you think about
the
all of
stars,
NASA's
do a little
accomplishments?
stargazing,
I mean,
and
those are all just
obviously
amazing
take a look at the
examples of why it's such a
telescopes
cool time
that are
to be
down
part
there. So
of
if
human
you
spaceflight
get an
and the larger
opportunity
space program. We're learning
to
so much, not
attend
only
one
about
of
our
those
planet,
events,
but our
they're
galaxy and the
awesome.
universe. Like those James Webb images
To
just
attend,
capture my
I've attended
imagination
one of
every
them,
time they release a new set.
and I
And so
believe
it's-
they also
yeah, we have a
hold some
lot going on
classes
and a
every
lot to be excited
Thursday
about.
down
Yeah, I hope
here
people are following
on
along for it because it is
Southmost,
truly great, and we
where
want
you can
people
go
to share
stargazing.
along with that. So, all right, 1 hour, 6 minutes and counting from liftoff of Artemis 1. Let's head back to the Launch Control Center. with
So
Daryl
let's
Mayo.
see what's going on.
thanks,
We'll
Megan.
raise up the
And,
volume
so
a
we
little
can
bit
update
and see
for
what the
you
latest
now.
is with
The
regards
Red
to the
Crew, of course,
launch.
completed its work on torquing down the bolts for that replenish valve on the core stage hydrogen side, and now we are back in replenish for core stage hydrogen, which is good news. The team now
That
looking
is
to
good
work
news.
on that upper stage, and we understand for the update to the NASA test director, they just informed the NTD that they can start getting back the flow on the upper stage as well. It went into a stop flow roughly around 10 p.m. Eastern time
As I
after a
mentioned
leak was
before,
detected.
the liquid
You can see the
oxygen
core
and liquid
stage status
hydrogen,
there.
the
Liquid
hydrogen has
oxygen
to be
side is
chilled
in
to
stable
minus
replenish both for the core stage
423
and the
degrees
upper stage of the
Fahrenheit,
rocket.
while the
Over on the right
liquid
side, you can see we've
oxygen
lost
is
some
chilled
hydrogen
at
since going into
minus
a stop flow
295
that allowed some
degrees
liquid
Fahrenheit.
hydrogen to
They're
boil
both
off
chilled and
during
mixed
about
together.
an hour or so while a red crew was sent
that's
out
pretty cold.
to the launch pad to
Not
make
even your restaurant
repairs.
meat locker gets
Now,
that
the
cold.
hydrogen bleed for the engines
Not even
was
parts of Canada
reestablished,
get that
and it looks like
cold, or
the
the
team
North
is
Pole,
back
for
on
that
track
matter.
to recover that after a stop flow halted the bleed. They are required to bleed that liquid hydrogen through the RS-25 engines for 90 minutes, but they're picking up where they left off, and that appears to be on track. In the meantime, we've had an update from the range, and the range has informed the NASA test director that currently at the moment, if we were to launch now, they are no-go due to the loss of signal on a radar site. That's currently being worked right now. Again, the range advising the NASA test director that they are no-go. The range is not clear for launch until they remedy that issue on their radar site.
Oh, no.
And so we're also tracking that. In the meantime, we started this at 3:23 p.m. Eastern time.
So now the
got the
issue
core stage
isn't the
tanked
rocket
in about
or
4
a
hours and
leak.
23
Now
minutes, and now
it's a radar
looking to get
installation,
everything
God
back
knows
on track
where.
to
It's
try to
called
make
the
that launch
range.
window
They
at
refer it as
1:04
to a
a.m.
range.
Eastern time,
And
which has
so
a 2-hour
without that,
window associated with
radar
it, all the way to
installation being
3 a.m.
online,
Eastern time. That's
there
the
is
latest
no
from firing room.
possibility of a launch
Thank you,
yet.
Daryl.
So
Now, there may not be astronauts aboard the Orion spacecraft
right now
for this
they've
flight
got to
test,
get
but
that
there are some
fixed.
passengers
Without
there for
radar,
very important missions.
they can't launch. It's kind of like
inside the Orion spacecraft.
So let's just look at some of the
we have some cool experiments
video here
to help us understand what the environment is like.
Although there's no humans aboard Artemis 1, we do have a few special passengers aboard that will help us pave the way for future Artemis missions.
So there's basically 3 occupants riding. You can kind of think about it like 3 astronauts. We have a moonican. We will also have 2 torsos that are learning about the moon and learning about the environment for our astronauts before they go.
We have a mannequin on Artemis 1. We call him our moonican for short.
That moonican is called Commander Moonican Campos.
The name is actually in homage to Arturo Campos,
who was an important person who helped bring the Apollo 13 capsule home. The moonican will sit in the commander's seat, and it will wear a suit just like our astronauts will wear.
Moonican Campos is actually weighted to simulate an actual human aboard the Orion spacecraft.
So it will help us understand what our astronauts will experience as they go to the moon and home.
The Orion Crew Survival System suit and the Orion seat were designed simultaneously to fit together as a seamless package. The actual design of the suit was built into the Orion seat, such that when they're in the suit, in the seat, it is a true cocoon of protection for them. During this test flight, the seat will actually be instrumented with accelerometers.
Sensors that tell us how much the chair is shaking during launch and re-entry, and how many G-forces or gravitational forces it experiences.
We expect Commander Moonican Campos to have a very exciting ride on his way to orbit. The thrill of launch, the experience of weightlessness, the excitement of landing. What we learn on Artemis 1 with our mannequins assistants will help us better understand how a human will actually behave in the seat, both for landing and for launch, to allow us to ensure their safety.
In addition to the moonican, we'll have 2 seats that have basically what's like a human dummy, an upper torso that are detecting how much radiation they're experiencing.
It's called the Matryoshka Astrorad Radiation Experiment, MARE. MARE is an international collaboration with German Aerospace Center, DLR, and with Israel Space Agency. The MARE experiment consists of 2 anthropomorphic phantoms called Helga and Zohar that are simulating a female body in a space radiation environment.
One of those will be wearing a safety vest,
the Astrorad radiation vest,
that we hope will help protect our astronauts from radiation.
Each one of the 2 phantoms will be equipped with about 20 battery-operated radiation instruments.
So between the 2, we'll be able to determine how well we can protect our astronauts from radiation events.
Space radiation is a mix of high-energy, heavy-charged particles that originate from the sun. To put things in perspective, 1 year of Earth exposure to cosmic rays is equivalent with 1 day of space radiation exposure in deep space. The purpose of the MARA experiment is to learn more about the radiation exposure as well as the biological effects of different organs.
So basically, it's like we have 3 occupants inside Orion that are learning about the moon and learning about the environment for our astronauts before they go.
Going back to the moon with new exploration goals and new technologies will help us gain better understanding of the challenges we encounter with deep space exploration.
We will have to develop new technology and solutions to meet really difficult challenges. But that's what NASA does. That's what Artemis is all about.
And we have one more passenger to tell you about. It's everyone's favorite Beagle that's had a special connection with NASA ever since Apollo.
Artemis is NASA's plan to go back to the moon, and Snoopy is to be the zero gravity
Snoopy's
indicator.
going back.
A zero-G or zero-gravity indicator demonstrates the moment that the crew in the spacecraft reach weightlessness.
Snoopy is about to take his first trip around the moon.
The relationship with NASA and Snoopy goes back about 50 years since the Apollo days.
He was the face of the safety campaign,
the icon for NASA's culture of safety and mission success. So NASA and Peanuts have a Space Act agreement.
And we collaborate together on STEM content. And we really were excited when it was decided that Snoopy would be the zero gravity indicator on Artemis 1. We wanted to go all out, so we created a custom Snoopy.
And the spacesuit is actually made out of material worn by the NASA astronauts.
Everything was done with extreme detail. They cut patterns for his suit, even how his collar worked and how the NASA Meatball logo looked.
We're very excited. I'm personally very excited.
I can't contain the excitement I am feeling about this day. Snoopy is going farther in space than he's ever been before.
This is a day that we've all been waiting for. It's fantastic.
And we snapped this picture of Snoopy and Orion. He's comfortable and ready for his journey to the moon. Lucky for us that Snoopy has this twin that's staying here on Earth. That way we can take a closer look at how cute he is. And this orange suit, I mean, it is amazing. It's actually the same material that would be worn by Artemis astronauts, right?
Yeah, you know, the suits we'll be wearing in Artemis ultimately are an update of the suits that the shuttle crews wore. They're this iconic orange color. And we've updated them, though, with new technologies and also new crew capabilities so that they can best protect the crew in our return to the moon. I actually got to work with that suit team before my assignment. That's cool. And so the suit's kind of near and dear to my heart.
Yeah, I think we have a picture of you wearing the suit as part of when you were helping to design it, right?
Yeah, so I was our representation from the crew office, from the astronaut office, to the engineering team that's working on putting this suit together. So I got the chance to wear it for some of the early testing, and it is an amazing suit, and it'll protect us while we're in the vehicle.
Cool. So what was your zero-G indicator?
Yeah, like the video mentioned, we always choose stuffed animals. So we actually had a turtle. We named her Pfau, which is German for peacock. And we chose that because Raj and I are from the turtle training class. So we thought it would be fun to have a sea turtle as our zero-G indicator. But we wanted to have a nod to Matthias, who is a German astronaut, so that's what we gave her a German name, and Tom, who's from the peacock class. So she's peacock colored, and it kind of worked for everybody.
I was about to ask, I was like, wait, why is it German for peacock, but it's a turtle?
Yeah, exactly.
Now I get
it. It was, diplomacy, crew diplomacy move.
Now I get it. So we had Turtle, we have Snoopy here. Why is it always toys?
I think the tradition goes back to crews taking stuffed animals from their children and sometimes flying the stuffed animals of their kids. That still happens to this day when a crew selects a zero-G indicator, but they're convenient because they're nice and soft. So if you're going to allow something to bounce around in the capsule, you want to make sure that it won't hurt the crew or any of the equipment.
And they're cute. I mean,
yeah.
come on.
Who doesn't want a mascot?
Makes you smile, yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, NASA's workforce has changed over the last 50 years. For Artemis 1 today, women make up 30% of the launch team. But when we first stepped on the moon with Apollo 11 in 1969, take a look at this picture here. You see this woman highlighted near the center there? That's going to be Joanne Morgan, and she was the only woman in the firing room. She now has a special message for the Artemis generation.
Hello, I'm Joanne Morgan, and I am so excited for Artemis 1. This flight test will bring new knowledge to people on Earth, and I'm thrilled to see such a diverse team at the LCC making it happen. Firing Room 1 is a different sight today than when I was on console for Apollo 11. I was totally focused on doing my job and never thought about being the only woman in the room. Today, women at NASA are center directors and launch and flight directors and have substantial roles in engineering, science, and technical areas. This is so important for a new generation, the Artemis generation, to see how individuals are leaders and contributors to the mission, and for youth across America and the planet to see this as well. After 50 years, it is gratifying to see this change, and I can't wait to see what you all accomplish together. New century, new generation, new mission to the moon and beyond. Godspeed, Artemis team and Artemis 1.
I think it's so great that we know she's following along and interested in this mission too.
Yeah, it's so awesome to see the women who have come before us at NASA and paved the way for a much more diverse team to contribute to these amazing missions.
Yeah, and speaking of women breaking the mold, before serving as a NASA astronaut, I know you were a naval officer and a member of the first class of women commissioned to the submarine community. How amazing is that? I mean, what would you say as you look at these pictures? What would you say to women, young girls who might be thinking, hey, I might want to join a predominantly male field?
Yeah, you know, I was just really lucky to be in the right place at the right time. I was a senior at the Naval Academy when they announced that they were going to change the policy and allow us to serve aboard submarines. But even before that change happened, I knew that I was passionate about serving in that role and I was dreaming about it. So I think allowing yourself to really examine what your passions are and be brave enough to dream that you could actually do those things. I had awesome mentors who encouraged me along the way and told me never close a door on yourself. You know, you always want to put yourself in the roles you're most passionate about, especially if you're going to challenge yourself. Doing something you love that's hard is so much better than doing something that you're not as well suited to. So I was just lucky I had some awesome leaders in my life who encouraged me to be brave enough to dream so that when those opportunities presented themselves, I was ready to take them on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Having mentors is always so important because, yes, sometimes you don't know what path to take, especially if you're blazing your own. So it's always so nice to have somebody to talk through some of that.
Absolutely.
52 minutes until the opening of the 2-hour window for Artemis 1 today. Once it soars off the launch pad, our colleagues over in Houston will take over. Leah, how are things looking in mission control right now?
Once again, it's 52 minutes before the start of the launch window. That means that...
hey, Megan, I'm here now, and thanks for joining us again here in the White Flight Control Room here at NASA's Johnson Space Center. So you might be wondering why Johnson Space Center will control the flight of Orion after liftoff, even though it's launching at Kennedy Space Center, and that's all about how our flight control centers are designed. Launch control is at Kennedy, while mission control is in Houston, and we also have the SLS Engineering Support Center at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. Ever since the Gemini 4 mission in 1965, all flights have been commanded from Houston after launch, so we have the infrastructure and the experience here at Johnson Space Center to work through long-duration missions with, or in this case, without crew. Additionally, launches must be conducted over water rather than over populated areas, which makes Kennedy Space Center a prime location. Again, we're ready to jump into action once SLS takes flight, and this room will be staffed around the clock until Orion splashes down at the end of the mission. We're excited to continue that work today with Artemis 1 and throughout the Artemis program, but for now, we'll turn it back over to you, Megan and Kayla.
Now, the fully stacked SLS and Orion system was rolled from the vehicle assembly building to the launch pad about 2 weeks ago. We captured this video of the 4-mile, 9-hour journey. It took a special transporter and a special team of people to make it happen. Hear from them what it's like to shoulder the weight of this moment.
The crawler transporter is it's a machine that goes and picks up the mobile launcher, the SLS rocket with Orion. It's basically the cornerstone of the mobile launch concept. Without the crawler, you couldn't transport the mobile launcher and the vehicle from the VAB to the pad or the pad back to the VAB. And it was designed and built for the Apollo program to move Saturn V's to the launch pad. Since then, we've modified it and used it to move the entire shuttle program. And after the shuttle program, we did extensive modifications, and now it's to be used to move Artemis to the launch pad. The crawler is 136 feet long from end to end. It's 114 feet wide from the edge of the truck to the other edge of the truck. It weighs 6.6 million pounds. It has the power to do 2 miles an hour, but you never want to go that fast. Generally, we're around 0.83 for SLS. Artemis will be one of the heaviest loads we've ever carried and one of the tallest loads we've carried. I am exceptionally proud of our team. They're very talented, they're very committed, and they're just all around good team. I think any problem that crops up or anything that comes up, we'll fix it and we'll get moving again. And again, it starts right here with the crawler. So if we do our job and everybody else does theirs, man, we're gonna have a successful launch. We're going back to the moon. This is gonna be just fantastic.
Such an impressive team, and the crawler, Kayla. I mean, this is a certificate from the Guinness Book of World Records.
Yeah, it's pretty cool getting recognized for the heaviest self-powered vehicle in the world at 3,106 tons.
That's amazing.
It's amazing.
I know. We were just talking about how awesome the crawler is. I mean, it was retrofitted. It was created in the Apollo for the Apollo missions, and it was updated, modified for shuttle, and now it's been modified for Artemis. It's just really an amazing machine, and the people who keep it maintained and operate it, like, I'm so glad that we could feature them today.
Absolutely.
All right, so we are 48 minutes and counting, again, from that opening of the 2-hour window we have today. Kayla, if you thought you were excited, you have got to check out this video here.
This is really cool. We got some children that are on a bus, and they're going to come here to the vehicle assembly building, and the administrator and I are going to jump on the bus and surprise them.
We're going to give them the opportunity to come in and go up the elevator with the rocket.
Wow! It's so cool! Hello! Look at that thing! Whoa, that's awesome!
Hey guys, would you like to see a moon rocket?
Yeah!
Because it is the future of our country, indeed the future of the world. And we saw what our space program does for science and technology and engineering and mathematics. We saw that in the Apollo generation.
All right, guys, what do you think? What I hope to achieve today is inspiring a new generation. I mean, the more people that we can get to see up close and personal this rocket, it's awe-inspiring. And I cannot wait till the launch. When America sees our rocket actually launch on a test flight to the moon, you know, it's just going to spark a whole new push for what we are doing.
Best day of my whole life ever. It's gonna be incredible. It was a dream come true.
This rocket is definitely going to the moon.
I think it's really amazing.
I was actually really excited because I've never seen a rocket like this close up.
Now we have the Artemis generation. This is a new generation of us going back to the moon to learn and live, and then we're going to Mars.
I told you they were so excited. They're so cute. Their faces, it was amazing.
I think my face looked pretty similar the first time I walked into the VAB and looked up at that rocket. I mean, the building is huge, and standing at the base of the rocket just takes your breath away. The scale of it, 322 feet, especially stacked on its end like that, is just amazing. So I almost relived my first time in the VAB through their eyes.
And it was really cool. There was this opportunity where they got to just ask any questions they wanted. I was there, so they were asking me questions. They were asking the administrator, Bob Cabana as well, and they just hands shot up. They just had questions, and then sometimes I didn't really know the answer, and they're like, well, it's this, and I was like, oh my God, they know so much and they're so interested in it. I mean, again, this is why we're doing this. This is part of the inspiring the next generation.
Absolutely. Whenever I get a chance to interact with kids kind of any age, all the way from elementary school up through college, the human spaceflight program, and Artemis in particular, I think really captures people's imagination and gets them interested in everything it takes to do something so daring and so complicated.
Yeah. And actually, before we move on, an interesting note about the opening music in that video, it's an original composition called The Artemis Generation, performed by the Cooper Middle School Band percussion section of McLean, Virginia. And to continue to inspire the Artemis generation, NASA invited students to take part in a national essay contest, challenging them to imagine what it'd be like to lead a week-long mission to the moon's South Pole. Here's the first winner now.
I gazed out of our moon pod window just before it was time to exit. My crew of 3 and I had been working for years to get here. Our crew consisted of a botanist, an engineer, a doctor, and me, an astrobiologist. We'd been picked because of how well we got along together, with our complementary STEM backgrounds and our naturally upbeat personalities. Houston, this is Artemis Crew 1, initiating airlock sequence, I said over my microphone. I looked at my crewmates, and as I stepped out of the pod, I felt so gratified, becoming the first woman on the moon. Our purpose was to set up a moon habitat containing the 4 things needed to keep a crew safe: oxygen and clean water, a waste disposal system, the veggie project for food, and a protective outside shell made of regolith and mycelium. We will build it over the next week, and it will be used by other astronauts for years to come. Embarking on this incredible adventure, I couldn't help but be grateful to be given this opportunity to lead the most remarkable crew and to know that I was a part of the Artemis generation.
So that was beautifully written by Taya Sauer of Laguna, California, and she was one of 3 essay winners. The 2 others were Austin Pritz of Walcott, Indiana, and Amanda Gutierrez of Lincoln, Nebraska. If you want to check out their essays, you can scan the QR code you see on the screen. The 3 of them beat out nearly 14,000 students who submitted essays, so you definitely want to check out the other 2, again, by scanning this QR code. So right now you're looking live at right outside of Kennedy Space Center's visitor complex. We have plenty of bleachers set out to accommodate, as you can see, a lot of guests that are hoping to see the launch today. So why don't we go in there and check back in with NASA's Leo Martin.
Hi, Megan. Yeah, this place is filling up. You can feel the excitement, people chattering, people sharing stories, people talking. And, we just heard about those Artemis Moonpod essay winners who are part of the Artemis generation. Also joining me tonight from the Artemis generation, we have 2 students who were actually able to come down and visit at Kennedy Space Center to watch this launch live tonight. I'm joined here by Denham and Allison. How does it feel to be here tonight?
Really, when I first found out, I was really nervous. I didn't really know what to expect. Like, we really just looked at each other and we kind of screamed.
Just out of excitement?
Yeah.
How did you feel?
Honestly, it was like amazing. It was surreal. Like that we have this opportunity out of so many people who applied for this. It was like outstanding.
And you guys actually got to take a tour of Kennedy Space Center a little bit earlier this week. What was something that you got to see that was just really outstanding?
I think it was the shuttle experience, like how it is when the rocket ship goes on up with people in it. It was honestly really fun doing it and learning like how they feel at the moment.
And Denham, what do you think it will be like to watch the world's most powerful rocket launch tonight from just across the river?
Well, really, I don't really know what to expect because I've never really done this before, but I feel like it would really be outstanding. I might shed a little tear, but I don't really know. Like, I'm really excited to be here, and it's amazing. Like,
It is amazing, and I don't think you're going to be the only one shedding tears tonight. Megan, we're super excited, eyes on Artemis, and we're ready to see the launch.
Thanks so much, guys. Now, Kayla, are you ready for more questions from social media? We're getting them in.
Always.
All right, let's take a look at the screen now. We have another celebrity question.
Hey, I'm Kiki Palmer, and I play Izzy Hawthorne in Pixar's Lightyear, and I can't wait to see Artemis 1 launch today. How will going back to the moon pave the way to Mars?
Thank you, Kiki.
Yeah, what an awesome question for tonight. I mean, the return to the moon is going to give us a chance to test all of the capabilities we need to operate on Mars. Mars is really far from home. It's going to take us 6 months just to get there, and that's with ideal planetary alignment and expected advances in propulsion technology. Then we'll spend about a year plus on the surface before it's 6 months home. And so the moon is a lot closer. We can get there in 3 days. The communications delay is a lot shorter, and so we can really test our operational concepts a lot closer to home. The moon's super far away. It's 250,000 miles, but that's way closer than Mars. So it's going to give us a chance to test all of our technologies so that we know what we need to develop in order to take that next step.
Yeah, we call it the next giant step for a reason. Mars is very, very far, like you said. All right, let's take another question from social media. Kayla, what inspired you to be an astronaut?
You know, my journey was a little bit different than some of my colleagues. I didn't grow up specifically dreaming of becoming an astronaut. I don't know what the barrier was there. I was aware of and inspired by the space program, but I never allowed myself to dream of becoming an astronaut until I had served on a submarine, actually. I think that operational experience that's so similar to what we do in the space program, if you think about it, we're sending humans to live, work, and do something of importance in a place where people aren't supposed to be, the depths of the ocean or the vacuum of space. And so I think those experiences gave me the confidence to even dream that I could become an astronaut, and then inspired me to apply in the first place.
And that doesn't deter you, again, like being in a place where, we're not supposed to be, a confined space at that.
Yeah, I think those parallels, I got a chance to meet an astronaut after serving on my submarine, Kay Heyer, who's also a Naval Academy graduate, class of 1981. And hearing about her experiences working on the space station really made me click. All of a sudden I said, the space station's a submarine in space.
Yes.
And it sounds silly, but I had never made that connection before. And once I did, I just couldn't stop dreaming about it.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that your story isn't, the typical one, as you said. Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Is Snoopy ready and excited?
Of course. I think like any crew member, Snoopy's been training for this moment. He knows what to expect in a nominal and an off-nominal launch and all the actions expected of him. So like any good crew member, he's ready to go. And
he has a suit that's been tailored to him. It's especially made for him, the way that the astronaut suits are especially made for them. So yeah, I think he's ready.
Yeah. Seeing the moon up close, he's ready to go.
So keep those questions coming. Use that hashtag Artemis and tweet or drop them in the comments wherever you're watching this broadcast. And don't forget those NASA Moon Snaps. Hashtag NASA Moon Snap for your moon-inspired content. Okay, we are now 37 minutes from the opening of our 2-hour launch window today. Let's check back in with Daryl with the launch team.
Yeah, we've had a couple of issues that the launch team has been working, and we have an update on both of those. First of all, is the leak, the liquid hydrogen leak in the replenish valve out at the mobile launcher. We understand from the launch team that that leak has not recurred. The work that happened out at the pad is that the red crew and the work that they did out there remedied the leak. That's good news. And now the liquid hydrogen tank on the core stage is back in replenish at this moment. And the upper stage of the rocket, liquid hydrogen side, is in fast fill. You can see from the graphic there that we are back up to 100% over on the liquid hydrogen side on the right hand of the screen. On the left hand of the screen, you can see we have been in stable replenish for liquid oxygen. Now, with regards to the range, they reported that they had an issue to the NASA test director with their radar sight later found out that that was actually a bad Ethernet switch that was cutting out and not providing them the data. The range reported that they will swap out that bad switch, and they're currently working on that. They advised at the time, about a half hour ago, that it would take them about 70 minutes, or about 25 minutes into that work. They did just recently update the NASA test director to say that it's going to take them a little bit longer because they're going to need to re-verify this Ethernet equipment once they have it installed. Again, that work is ongoing, but at the moment, if we were launching right now, the range is no-go as a result of that bad Ethernet switch. The Dolly Loop file, which helps steer the Space Launch System through the upper atmosphere, has been uploaded to the rocket, and so we're good to go there in terms of other configurations that are ongoing. But we are continuing to monitor communications of the launch team about holding to the top of the window, currently slated for 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time. But we do have 2 hours, and we have yet to see whether or not the launch team is going to be able to make enough adjustments in order to hit the top of that window. No slip yet, but we're monitoring their work, and we'll give you an update when we have it. Back to you, Megan.
Cameras.
Thank you, Daryl. Really great news about that leak. Kayla and I actually said, wow, that's really great news. So we'll wait on your next update. Let's go back live now to Kennedy Space Center's visitor complex, where we have NASA's Dan Hewitt inside there with a new moon board. Dan, let's focus in on Orion now. It has 3 main elements, right?
That's right, Megan. And Orion is the spacecraft that's going to be carrying our Artemis astronauts off of planet Earth and then returning them home. As you said, 3 major components, so we'll jump in here at the top with the first one, the launch abort system. This is a critical safety feature on Orion, designed to pull the capsule away from the SLS stack in the event of an emergency on the pad or the way uphill. And it does that using 3 solid rocket motors. The first one, the abort motor, can fire within milliseconds of automatically detecting an issue, pulling the capsule away to a safe distance. After that, the attitude adjustment motor. This one will fire. We can cancel out any rates, put us into a nice stable glide before we get ready to fire the jettison motor. This is the one that will actually take the launch abort system off of Orion, allowing it to then deploy parachutes and parachute down to safety. I will note the jettison motor, the only one that fires no matter what on a normal mission. It's going to fire once we're high enough in the atmosphere. And for Artemis 1, that is the only motor on this that is active. The attitude and abort motors are inert for Artemis 1. And that's all focused on protecting this, the Orion crew module. This is where you have your astronauts physically inside. In the capsule, you have everything you need to keep a crew safe, happy, healthy, thriving in deep space. You have a pressurized environment, seats, crew displays, toilet, everything that you need. On the outside, couple of critical features. On the bottom, the heat shield. Remember, this is goal number 1 for this mission, is testing that heat shield. It's an ablative structure made to survive that fiery re-entry at the end of a mission. Along the outside, you see these small gray circles. Those are reaction control system thrusters. Orion can use that at the very end to control the yaw, pitch, and roll as it's hurtling through the atmosphere. We have windows. You need windows to look outside. 2 on the front, 2 on the sides, 1 in the side hatch, 1 up top, in the very top docking hatch. Those are different layers of glass and acrylics for pressure and thermal control. We have a docking system, an uprighting system, parachutes, all for the very end of the mission. Third and final piece, down here at the bottom, the European Service Module. This has all of the propulsion assets for after SLS has done its job. Starting on the bottom, the large orbital maneuvering system engine. This is the one that's providing the most thrust for all of those key maneuvers around the moon. 8 auxiliary thrusters also around the aft to the bottom part of the service module to provide some additional push as well. And then 24 of these smaller reaction control system thrusters. They can be used for attitude control, which way you're pointing, as well as small translational maneuvers moving side to side. We flip the vehicle up, we see 4 solar arrays, each one 24 feet in length, altogether generating 11 kilowatts of electrical power for Orion systems. Inside the service module, you have tanks for things like the thermal control system, potable water when we have a crew on board, and also pressurized oxygen and nitrogen for an atmosphere, which gets fed through this umbilical here to the crew module, along with electrical lines. That's also what's going to separate us at the very end of the mission. So that's Orion. It's going to be making its first flight around the moon on Artemis 1. Can't wait to see it, taking those selfies around our lunar neighbor. Send it back over to you, Megan.
Thanks, Dan. That last component Dan talked about, the European Service Module provided by the European Space Agency. Let's go to Jasmine for that.
Now, Lucky.
Thank you, Megan. We are back in Firing Room 2 with the Launch Control Center, and joining us now is Philippe Delou, ESA's program manager for the Orion European Service Module. You have quite the title there, a big title for a big job, I'm sure. We are very glad to have you here, and we understand that the European Service Module is powering Orion that's going to send humanity farther than ever before. Philippe, how is it getting us there?
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So yes, the service module accommodates the propulsion system that contains among the tanks and the pressurization of the engine.
Hey, Lucky.
All the engines.
Say hi to everybody.
In the total, among which the main engine, which
are you here to watch the launch too?
The burns to put Orion into
or are you tired?
Moon orbit, and then
you probably want Daddy to go to bed over there too, don't you?
To Earth. The other engines are used for attitude correction.
I know.
During,
it's past their bedtime.
Attitude control.
That's the deal. That's why they're here. They're kind of waiting for me to go to bed already. But boys, I've got to wait until this thing launches.
Generates the power and distributes the electricity.
I know.
To the crew module and the service module equipment so that they can operate. And the third function is the thermal control.
Little rescue dog. He's been with us for like 5 years.
The service module accommodates radiators to reject the heat.
He's a sweet little dog. He's also the guard dog of the house.
That will eventually
He's brave.
be in the Orion. Finally, not on Artemis 1, but on future Artemis mission, it will have tanks to store the crew consumable, the water, the oxygen, and the nitrogen.
Come on, you gotta get down.
We understand too that you are monitoring launch here in Firing Room 2 with us, and you also have a team. We're going to bring up a picture of that team right now, or a live look inside ESA's control room in the Netherlands. So
that is the ESA control room in the Netherlands.
Well, the
that is the control room that monitors the control module under the Orion space capsule. As it was earlier mentioned, the ESA service module was designed and manufactured by Airbus, the
operations are performed also
nominally, and plane manufacturer,
identify
direct
if
competitor to Boeing.
Goes wrong, if something goes not nominal.
While they may be competitors when it comes to airplanes, they seem to be partners when it comes to space. Boeing is also one of the primary contractors, by the way, of the SLS system for any of those that don't know that.
We're really glad to hear that your teams are monitoring here.
Unlike SpaceX,
in the Netherlands
that
as well.
manufactures
And this has been
all
a
their
huge
hardware,
collaboration. There were 10 countries that
the SLS
contributed to
system
the European Service Module.
is a
Can you tell me about that
combination
teamwork?
of
Indeed, it was a real
partnerships
of about
with
60 companies
European
across 10
countries.
European countries. Well, together with the prime contractor, we have selected the finest companies available in Europe to build the state-of-the-art equipment which is needed to go back to the moon with humans.
Right, we're going back to the moon and farther even beyond. Thank you so much, Philippe. I really appreciate you being here tonight.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
Of course, of course. Megan, back to you.
Now it's time to check back in with Mission Control in Houston. Leah, how are things over there?
Things are good over here at Johnson Space Center, which is just one part of an agency-wide effort with many NASA programs doing their part to make future missions a reality. When the first woman and first person of color travel to the moon, they'll be wearing a state-of-the-art launch and entry spacesuit called the Orion Crew Survival System. When they set foot on the moon, they'll be in another all-new next-gen suit, both being developed at the Johnson Space Center and through partnerships with commercial providers. During those spacewalks, astronauts will collect samples samples for
just
further study of the moon.
24-inch solar
The
panels,
Astromaterials
4 of them.
Research and Exploration Science Division at JSC
So
is preparing to
imagine
receive
for all
rocks,
those
soil, and ice collected from the
climate
moon's
change
south pole, which has a
deniers
unique
out
crater
there
impact
who
history
hate
and ice
solar
deposits that have
energy.
never been sampled. And leading the
As
effort
I've
to advance
mentioned
capabilities
before,
for science exploration
if
and commercial
solar
development of
energy
the moon
is
is the
good enough
Commercial
for
Lunar Payload
space,
Services
it's good
Initiative,
enough
or
for
CLIPS.
us
More than a
here
dozen
on
American
planet
companies
Earth.
are developing science investigations and tech demos.
Solar
Additionally,
panels
we
have
need a
been used for
sustainable
over
presence,
50 years for most of these
station
space
in orbit
programs,
to facilitate
and they
continuous
work
lunar
day in
access
and
and
day
serve as a
out.
home base or a
So,
jumping off point for new deep space exploration missions.
why
This is where Gateway comes in. It's a
the
multi-purpose
opposition
lunar
has
space
been so
station
much,
being
I
developed
don't
by a
know.
worldwide effort led out of JSC. NASA is again teaming up with international and commercial partners to create this essential component. Artemis and Gateway will enable NASA's Human Research Program to better understand how the human body adapts beyond low Earth orbit, ensuring future astronauts traveling to the moon and Mars have the tools to keep healthy and thrive in new environments. And with that,
And
we're going to turn it back
for
over
my
to
third
Megan
guest-
and Kayla at Kennedy.
Thank you so much. So Artemis
hi.
will also facilitate new discoveries about the moon. So to tell us what we're hoping to learn, we have Sarah Noble here. She's the
here's my
Artemis
third
Lunar
dog.
Science Lead.
His
Great to
name's
have you
Ty,
here.
everybody.
So tell us about what we
So we've
know
had
about
Oreo
the moon.
that came to visit.
Yeah, so we learned a ton about the
We had
moon during
Lucky
Apollo,
just a
right?
few
From the
minutes
samples
ago.
and the data that we
And
collected.
now
In
that
fact,
we've
we're
got
still
Ty,
learning from
he's
those
also a
samples and
Shih
data even
Tzu,
today, 50
like
years
Oreo,
later. But then
he's
since
a short
Apollo,
Shih Tzu.
you know, we've actually been
And
studying the
he's
moon
got a
mostly
blue
from
eye
above, learning
and a gray
about
eye.
getting more of a global perspective on the
has
moon that we
two
really
blue
didn't have
eyes,
during
so-
Apollo. And so that's allowed
But
us to
Ty
ask a lot
is
better
our latest
questions and to
doggy.
understand where to go to find the answers to them.
Now that we're headed back
we're
to the
given
moon,
this
sending
puppy by
human
somebody
beings as part of the
else,
Artemis
but,
program, what are we hoping to learn that's
It's been
new?
a pleasure to have.
Yeah, so we're going to
Even
an
though he's
entirely
sometimes a
different
little
part of the moon
rascal
for
at
Artemis,
times,
right? During Apollo, we kind of
he
landed
loves toys,
almost in
by
the
the
same
way.
place, like 6 times, right? In the sort of central
Hey,
near
Ty.
side of the moon. But for
Say hi
Artemis,
to
we're going to go
everybody.
explore a
Look,
new part of
everybody
the moon.
out
We're going to
there.
go to the South Pole,
Look, you
which
wanna
is
go to
some of
the
the
moon, Ty?
oldest rocks on the
wanna
moon.
go to the
It's
moon?
part of the
Look at
original
that.
crust of the moon.
Look at
And
the
there's
moon,
places
Ty.
there that are permanently shadowed,
looks like
where we think that water and
Looks
other
like a big
molecules
snack, doesn't it?
sort of get trapped, and we really want to understand what those
know you're
are, and so
tired
that we
too,
can
baby
use
boy.
them for both science and
It's
for
time
as
to
a
go
resource.
night-night.
Sarah,
It's
we're
time
also
to go
planning to
night-night,
land a
Ty.
rover at the South Pole of the moon in
All
late
right, I'm gonna let
2024.
you
Can you
go,
tell us about
'cause you're
that?
Yeah,
very
absolutely.
heavy.
The Viper rover, the Volatiles Investigating
So all
Polar
my
Exploration
doggies
rover,
have come to visit the
It's going
show
to go
tonight.
land near the South Pole,
The
and
only
it's
one
actually going
left
to
is
explore some of
Mabel
these
the cat,
permanently
but
shadowed
she's
areas.
very
It's going to dip into them,
antisocial, so I
drill
doubt
down,
that,
try to find out
they're
what
going
that
to.
water
That
is,
she's
what
gonna
else is
come
there,
over.
what form that water is, how much is there, so that we can really understand it both from a science perspective, and if we want to use it as a resource, we will understand how to extract it.
So some people might say, you know, we have all these rovers, we have access to machines that can do a lot of the work on the surface of the moon for us, so why is it important to return humans to the moon?
Yeah, it's not an either-or proposition, right? There are some things that robots are better at and some things that humans are better at. And it turns out that humans are much better field geologists. We're really much more efficient and better at that. Plus, we can do better. We can deploy more complicated instruments, and we can use tools in ways that it's very difficult for robots to do, so we can collect better samples. And one of the great things is that we can bring back a lot of samples, right? When we do robotic sample return, it's usually a very small amount. But if you look at what we brought back from Apollo, it's a large amount of samples that literally hundreds, probably maybe thousands of scientists have been able to study over the years and over generations. And that's a lot of brain power to put behind those samples.
So again, that's how Artemis and Apollo are different. Now we're utilizing machines and people.
That's right.
To
Work
hopefully
together.
advance. Yeah.
That's right.
Perfect. Sarah, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
So in honor of our destination, the moon, we asked you all to create moon-inspired content and share them with us using the hashtag #NASAMoonSnap. We got so many wonderful submissions, so why don't we check them out now?
Oh wow, look at this artwork. Pretty cool stuff. Look at that. Well, I think I waited for my co-host quite a bit, so I actually killed the Zoom session.
That was a really cool look
There was
at
no
all
point
the
of
different
keeping it
kinds
on.
of creations, recipes, and also art.
I figured it was going to be
It was
tough,
great to see what people
especially at
submitted.
10 o'clock
Yeah, it's
show.
awesome to see the creativity out there and how people are
so
engaging with this mission in so many
definitely
different
it
ways.
wasn't
So I
something
know that you
we
didn't
typically
submit it
do.
yet, but you
We
did create a
usually do an
moon
8
snap,
o'clock
so
show.
to say. So why don't we take a look at that picture?
That typically is
Yeah,
my
that's one of my
sweet
favorite
spot.
pictures of the moon that I was able to
But,
take from orbit.
I kind of
I think
figured
for
it was
me,
going to be
it kind of
tough
reminds
for
me of that
one of
iconic
my
picture
hosts
of
to
moonrise or
do a 10
Earthrise from the
o'clock
moon
show.
from
My
Apollo.
other host,
and it's kind of that in reverse. I
had
think
a
there's
change
something
in
about
schedule,
seeing the moon from
so
orbit
work
around the
schedule,
Earth
so
that
he had to
makes
work
it seem
nights
a little bit easier
instead
to
of
imagine
days
what it'd
as
be
he
like
was
to have
scheduled.
that
So
view from the moon
he
looking
was
back at our home
originally
planet.
supposed to be
Yeah,
on the
you should
show,
definitely
but
submit that because that's an
unfortunately,
amazing photo.
because
Did
of
you
work,
take that yourself?
he wasn't able
Yeah,
to
out of the
make it,
cupola
so-
window aboard the space station.
Wow, the
no
resolution's
worries.
great.
The cameras
you
we
know,
have
we're
up there
good.
are incredible.
I
Yeah.
typically
It's
can,
awesome.
So
handle these
haven't
shows
taken
on
a
my
moon
own
snap, so
for
I
the
had
most
nothing
part.
to submit.
you
So
know.
how do you
So-
feel about creating a moon snap with me?
Let's do it.
All right, well, take that.
Plus, I'm a
if you
vampire,
don't mind
so I can
lifting
stay
it up,
on a
and we're
lot
just
longer
gonna
than
snap
most
a
people
photo
can.
here. Oh, lighting.
I'd like to
Perfect.
get one of
So
those
I just created a moon snap. I love it.
moon
I'm going to
models.
share
That
it.
would be kinda
And
cool
again,
to
this is
have
just
on
to
a
encourage
desk.
people to really get
Actually,
involved
for
in
those
this
of
mission.
you that
So
don't
we will
know,
continue to collect and share those photos. So again,
my
if you have a
desk,
NASA moon
I
snap, just use
have
that hashtag.
this,
Okay, Artemis 1 comes amid a very
unique
busy
sculpture,
year and
and it
exciting year at
was,
NASA. Some of the highlights include 2 more commercial
it
crew
was,
launches with SpaceX,
created by
Crew
my
4 in
nephew,
April, and then
my
Crew
nephew
5
Sonny.
last month. In May,
And if
NASA
y'all
and
can't
Boeing flew
tell, it
OFT-2, the
is a
second uncrewed
replica
flight test of the Starliner
of
capsule.
the
The goal is
Roswell
to
crash
certify the
of
capsule for regular flights
1947.
to the International Space Station after a crewed
There's some
flight
people
test
that
next
believe
year.
that didn't happen.
In
There's
July, we
others that
released the
think
first
it's
images
historical
captured by our
fact.
James Webb Telescope, and oh my,
regardless,
those are
it
really
is a unique
beautiful,
sculpture that I've
fascinating
had for
photos, and they're
over
going to really help
25
us answer
years.
some of astronomy's biggest
And
questions
basically
about how our
here is
universe
the
began.
flying saucer
And then in September,
that
we
is
intentionally
embedded
slammed
into
the
Earth,
DART
and right
spacecraft
here
into
is
asteroid
the
Dimorphos.
astronaut.
Boom, look at
I'm
that.
sorry, not the
And we
astronaut, but the
successfully changed
alien
its course. The
that
asteroid
has a
wasn't
broken
headed
leg
for
there.
Earth, but the test was
And
to
then
show we
right
could
here,
defend our planet
the
if
words
needed. And recently, 2 other missions that benefit
And
the Artemis
basically it
program.
opens up,
Last
and
week,
it's a
we
little
tested a
compartment
new
where I store
inflatable
things,
heat
but
shield that could help us
I've had this
eventually
for
land humans on
25
Mars.
years,
And
and
just
it
2 days
sits on my
ago,
desk
Capstone
here,
arrived at its intended orbit
every
around the
day.
moon.
So,
The small satellite launched
pretty
from
cool,
New Zealand
huh?
in June and will now test a unique
I don't think my nephew
lunar
ever
orbit
thought that
for
I'd
a
keep
future
this for
space
25
station there.
years, but it's something that's very close to my heart.
Artemis 1 heralds a new era in the history of human spaceflight. It marks a pivotal next step in humanity's return to the moon, ushering in a new generation of astronauts, technology, and research. This critical flight test sets the course for a bright future at the moon. It represents our ability to safely send Artemis astronauts and critical hardware to lunar orbit. Humanity will experience
It's
Artemis
18
in different ways than we
to
did
launch
Apollo. We will
Or the start
explore
of the launch
new
window,
areas of
that
the
is.
moon with 21st
Hoping that
century
shortly
materials,
after 18
technologies,
minutes they'll make an
systems,
attempt to
and
launch.
operations.
That's the
Gateway
goal.
will be
Otherwise, I'm
humanity's
going to be
first
very
space station
sleepy
to
tomorrow.
orbit the moon.
I'm not
built
going to get
with
much
next
sleep.
generation technology. Gateway will not only provide a deep space outpost for future lunar expeditions.
By the
it
way,
will also
that
serve as a
gateway
station for landers,
system is being
experiments,
designed
and
by
supplies.
SpaceX.
Starting with the core power and habitation elements,
SpaceX has
Gateway
been
will grow with
contracted
increasing
to
capability as
design
international partners contribute
Gateway,
new habitat and
space
refueling
station
modules, observation
well.
windows,
So
external
there's a lot of
robotics,
partnerships
and
that are
more.
involved for
Gateway will enable
this
longer stays
second
and
phase
more
of,
science to be conducted
lunar
on and around
exploration.
the moon than ever
It's
before.
just not one
and
company.
one day,
It's just
it
not
will help
one
set the
source.
stage for missions
It's
to
a
Mars.
combination foundation of
A highly
cooperation.
skilled, diverse core of astronauts will be selected for Artemis missions,
At the end of the
including
day,
the first woman and
everybody's on the
first
same
person of
team,
color
and I
to
think
step
that's
foot on
what's
the moon.
important.
Aboard Gateway, the crew will conduct exciting research from their unique deep space vantage point. Gateway will
really
also
do
be
wanna
a transfer
thank those
station for
that
astronauts to
have
board
made a
innovative
point to
human
log in
landing
tonight.
systems
I
that will ferry them
apologize
to
for
and from the lunar
delay.
surface for exciting scientific
It's not-
expeditions near the South Pole. Once on the
something
moon,
that we
Artemis
control,
astronauts
obviously.
will use expertise in fields
But,
like biology and geology to conduct groundbreaking
I
research in
definitely,
modern spacesuits
appreciate
using
everybody
advanced
who tunes
tools.
in
They will drive
on
new
every
rovers
show.
to investigate the lunar terrain and unlock some
everybody
of the
who
greatest mysteries of our solar
looks at our
system.
posts that we post daily.
Artemis 1 cements our capability to send astronauts and
believe
cargo to the moon
space
for
program,
years to come.
Whether the space
We're going
program
back
is
to the
Florida,
moon. We
or
are
whether
Artemis.
we're building Starship rockets here in Brownsville.
As we approach the opening of
Everybody
our
is
2-hour launch window, we have a
think
special
that is
musical
fascinating.
performance for you.
We
America
are
the
truly the
Beautiful,
gateway
played in honor of the flight
the
test
beyond.
by the Philadelphia Orchestra and Yo-Yo Ma.
Yes, Ramiro, that's for sure. You do want to close your doors when you pass through Roswell. We'll just lower this a little bit. I'm not so much into orchestra music, even though I don't mind orchestra music, but you know, I think if it's a way to pass the time, I guess that's kind of cool too, right? But yeah, I've never been to Roswell. I've always wanted to. In fact, I've always thought of taking a trip over to California and driving all the way to California, and definitely one of my first stops would be Roswell. You know, eat at one of those Roswell alien diners, you know, and buy some, you know, Roswell paraphernalia. You know, for those of you that don't know, besides space stuff, I was an avid fan of the X-Files for years. I watched every show. At Comic-Con here, I've been there twice, by the way, here in McAllen when they have Comic-Con every year. And the first time around, I got to meet the cigarette smoking man from the X-Files. He was played by a Canadian actor, William B. Davis. But if you recall, the cigarette smoking man was Fox Mulder's nemesis through the entire, was it 8 or 9 seasons? Something like that. But I got to actually meet William B. Davis, so that was pretty cool. And then the second time that I went to Comic-Con, shortly before the pandemic, I didn't get to see William Shatner, but he was there. But that wasn't the first time that I had an opportunity to attend a William Shatner event. Actually, in Houston, there was a Star Trek convention of which I attended, and those are pretty cool. If you've never been to a Star Trek convention, you need to go to one. A lot of people dress up in all kinds of attire, whether Starfleet or the Klingons or the Borg.
It really has me feeling quite emotional right
But
now.
I got to see William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy up close, so that was pretty cool. So it was once in a lifetime, and I definitely enjoyed. It looks like the Vice President is on site as we speak to watch the launch. My co-host Doug would have been very excited about that. He really is a big fan of Vice President Harris, so it's unfortunate that Doug went to bed early today, so he missed the opportunity to see the Vice President, you know, as a spectator for the launch. But once again, if you get an opportunity to go to Comic-Con, it's definitely... Oh, look at that. There's Jack Black.
It was part of a little movie called Apollo 10 and a Half, A Space
Look at that.
Age
That's
Childhood.
pretty cool.
And I have a few burning queries. Question the first. How is Artemis different than Apollo?
Artemis is different than Apollo because we're returning to the moon, but
They've
this
been
time we're going
asking
to
celebrity
stay. So rather than a
questions, or
short visit
celebrities
where
been
we can
asking
do
questions
some
all
amazing
night
science,
long,
but it was pretty
and,
limited by these
it's
short
pretty
visits,
cool
kind of
to
a
see
small
Jack
area of the
Black.
moon. We're going
Jack
to the
Black
South
is one of
Pole,
my
and we're going to
favorite
learn how to
actors.
live there long term. So we're going to be
I've
building
enjoyed
habitats. We're going to have
watching him in
rovers. We're going to have
Nacho
all of
Libre
this
and, of
infrastructure
course,
on the moon
House
supporting
of Rock. I think
scientific
that's my
discovery, but
favorite,
also that next big step to
Jack
Mars.
Black
I love
movie.
seeing celebrities
back a
also
lot of
take part and
memories
ask
for me,
questions
so
because it really shows that
that's
this is
pretty
something
cool.
that's captivating a lot of people. So that was really fun to see Jack Black.
11
Also,
minutes and
Query the
42
First.
seconds
That was funny.
for the opening of the launch
All right,
window,
let's go to
guys,
the second
so-
question. How does it feel in space?
Being in space is
Ah, look,
amazing. I mean,
we're getting
for
Twitter
us launching
feeds. I guess
to orbit around the
Elon's,
Earth and then go to the space
service
station, where I
isn't,
just was for 6
so bad
months,
after all
we're in an
for those
apparent microgravity environment. So
Twitter
for us,
haters
it feels
now.
like we're weightless, like we're floating. So you have to relearn how to
Yeah,
live and work in that
but,
space. But once you get used to it, it's a lot of fun.
Once
Yeah, we
again,
were just talking.
I wanna
Jessica
thank
Watkins,
those that
another
are still
astronaut,
on
NASA astronaut, was just here.
with
and
us.
she was saying that actually when you came back on Earth, that was an
You
adjustment
know, we
as well
couldn't
because you
be
got
here
so
today.
used
I
to,
think we're close to
used to living on the space station.
pretty
Yeah,
close
it-
to
the
52
transition home was
episodes
actually
since
a
we
lot harder
started
for me
back
than
in
the transition
November
up there
of
because our
20.
vestibular systems kind of remap. We start ignoring all the sensors in our inner ear that tell us how our bodies are moving
2021?
because the space environment
No, I'm
is so
sorry.
strange.
Was
but
it?
we
Yeah,
really need that on
2021.
Earth to balance and control
We
our bodies.
started our
so when
Black
we get back, it takes
Friday
a couple of days before
episodes.
we
We
feel
started
comfortable.
having those.
Really interesting. Thanks so much for
and,
those. Okay,
we
so
never
we
thought
are 10
we'd be
minutes until the opening of our 2-hour launch window today. So
in
why don't we
the
head back over to Daryl? Daryl, tell us
closing
what's
days of
happening now.
November now,
Yeah, Megan, we
with
actually have about 10 minutes
close to
before we go
52
into a
episodes.
half-hour
So
hold.
all of
The
that would
half-hour
not be
hold is
possible
part of
without
the
our
L clock,
viewers.
and what you see on your
You
monitor
know,
right
we
now,
are
I believe,
different
is the
than
T
some of the other
clock.
podcasts
So,
around
in about 10
town.
minutes, we'll hold
You know,
for a half hour.
we are an
and
educational
currently the launch
podcast.
team
We
is
are an
trying to
informative
evaluate,
podcast.
how much of a delay may result from
So
some issues
we're
that
definitely
we've been
different,
facing,
and we try to
over
bring
the past
quality
hour. Just to recap
entertainment,
those, we had
quality
a
programming,
leak
just
in a
like
replenish
this.
valve,
It's
on
about
the mobile
providing
launcher that
information
feeds, into liquid
and being an
hydrogen core
inspiration
stage
to
tank.
those
That's been
who
resolved. The
have a
leak,
deep appreciation
has
of
been
technology,
fixed,
as
and
well
we're moving
as
forward. Currently,
you
the
know,
upper
are
stage
inspired
of the
by
rocket for liquid
space. And I think
is roughly
that is something that makes this
78%
podcast
at the moment.
pretty unique.
So that is tracking.
We're not out
Progress
chasing
continues there.
we're not
The
out
core
chasing
stage has been
Bigfoot.
topped off,
We're not out
and
chasing
now both
chupacabra.
liquid oxygen
It's not
and
about
liquid
politics,
hydrogen
who's
are
up and who's
100%,
down, who's
along
in and
with
who's
the
out.
upper stage
This is
of,
a
the
different
liquid hydrogen
podcast,
side
and it will
of
it
the
will
equation.
remain a
So
different
we're
podcast
just
as long
waiting
as I'm
on
hosting
the
this
complete
podcast.
tanking
So,
of the upper stage.
but none of
liquid
this would be
hydrogen.
possible
Now,
without
with regards to the range
support and
issue that
viewership
we had, we just
of
got an
everyone
update
that tunes in
from the
every
range.
day.
The 45th Space Wing
And Brownsville Tech Live
officer
isn't the
reported
only
in to
podcast
the
that
NASA
the
test director
group
that the
has.
Ethernet
We
switch,
have
has been
a gaming
replaced.
podcast.
This
We just
problematic
closed
switch,
our
took down
sports
their ability to see
podcast, which was
radar
with
from one
baseball
of their assets,
primarily.
which is key in getting
We have plans to
acquisition
launch
and
a
signal for the flight termination
football
system,
show
if
towards
it
the
were to
latter
be
end
needed.
of the
course,
football
this is a
season.
critical system
And
that has to be
we're
tested before
trying to get
we can
the
launch.
Daniel's
So at
Barbecue
the
Pit
moment, we're
live
looking still at a
off the ground. We've had a few
1:04
issues, so
a.m.
we should
Eastern
be back
time
on track here in
launch,
about a week
but
or
it is
so.
pretty
So
clear from the work that is ahead
we're
that
pretty excited, everybody.
it looks like
with
we're going to
regards
slip
to
into that
the content
window.
that we're
How much exactly,
putting out there. So
we don't have
once
an
again, I
accurate
appreciate
calculation from
everybody
the
that
launch
has
team
stayed
as
on.
of right now. But of course, we're anticipating that. So for the
It's-
moment, you see on your clock now, we are in the T-minus 10-minute hold.
We are
just entered
at
that,
T minus
and
10
now
minutes,
roughly we're looking
so
at 28
it just
minutes,
may happen,
to
folks.
resume terminal count. The
That
launch
would be
team will
great.
assess what work needs to be
It
done.
would be
How
awesome
that syncs
if
up
this
with the
would
range
just happen.
getting back online with their
Imagine that
equipment,
we're
and then we
headed
should
back
have a
to
new
the moon
T0
after
for you
50
soon.
years.
That's the latest from Firing Room 1
This is
here at the
just
Kennedy Space
awesome.
Center. Megan, back to you.
So things are obviously still very dynamic. We're going to come back to Daryl as much as possible. Now, to understand where we are going, we have to know where
I'm
we've
not
been.
sure about
To
that.
do that, we spoke to some of the special
But,
few who walked on the moon.
I don't know if they
and those
came
who
from
sent them.
outer space, but there's sure a few ugly bobcats at the Sierra Club here keeps on fighting for when it comes to SpaceX, by the way.
Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills.
It's been 50 years since we've been to the moon, and we've got a great program called Artemis. We're going back. The Apollo program was a
That's
test
Buzz Aldrin.
for the American people, that you can do what you set out to do. All it took was turning to it and making it happen.
We are go for a mission to the moon at this time.
Engines on 5, 4, 3, 2, all engines running.
You know, when I started this show earlier this evening, one of the very first clips that we showed was John F. Kennedy's speech at Rice University, setting the stage and the goal to land a man on the moon within a decade of the 1960s.
The landing to me was a great celebration. The nation was almost euphoric.
He never lived to see his dream and realization come true.
There are so many things that we
are
can
very
eventually
blessed
learn
that
about our universe.
the president
and the
had the
spacecraft that we
vision
use exploring.
to take us further and make us dream
We are
what
a
we didn't
nation
think
of
was
explorers.
possible.
During Apollo, we were on national TV literally
And for
every
that,
day because we were doing something visible
we are thankful
that America
that
could see and they could feel and say, look
JFK
what we are doing.
was
And I believe Artemis
there
is
at the
going
right
to come up
place
and
at
say,
the right
look what we are
regardless
capable
of what your
and
political
what we are
party
doing
may be,
now.
regardless of your ideology, there is no doubt that without JFK
Artemis will stand on the shoulders
leading
of Apollo.
that charge,
They're going to have the eyes of the world on them.
we would
when they
have we
start
wouldn't
down this
even
trail.
be here today at this moment in time.
The science of a space flight is one that
Let's
will
give credit
continue to
where credit is
inspire.
due.
Going to the moon generates
Regardless of
technology,
political party
more
or ideology.
communications, more computer
There are
technology,
far
more
things that are
sophistication
greater
in
to aspire to
manufacturing
than
that help us in
political
everyday
dogma.
life.
At the
We
end
have
of the
a
day,
generation that is ready, a
political
generation
dogma
with the
gets us
technology, a
nowhere.
generation with the education. Artemis represents the future in space. It is our next big step, and it is time to take it.
You know, there is a time for
If you're
politics.
just joining us,
There's no
welcome
doubt
to NASA's
about
Kennedy
that.
Space Center, where
We had a
are showing you a
political
live look of
show
another
last week.
visitor center. This is the U.S.
This ain't
Space
one
and
of them.
Rocket Center. Wow, take a look at all of those people who are there hoping to watch the launch today. You know, this is the visitor
Look at
center
all those
for the
people
Marshall
out there,
Space Flight
folks.
Center in Huntsville,
I really
Alabama.
can't wait
They,
till
that
next
center
month
played a
when
crucial
SpaceX
role,
launches
in
the
contributing
Starship
to the Artemis program. So I'm
SN-24
not
here at Boca
I'm not
Chica.
surprised that there are a bunch of people there watching.
I hope that there's a crowd
All right,
large
so
enough
now we're going to take a
over
go
on the
back
island
to
at the
Leah
amphitheater
Martin
to
over at
show
Banana Creek. Again,
a
that's
level
right
of
outside of our
support.
visitor center, and she's
I
with
think
some
it's
other
pretty
folks who came out
important
to watch
that this
today's
community
launch.
steps up,
Yeah, you know, Megan, we talked about
opens
this
their
being
eyes,
America's rocket,
and
right?
sees
Every
what's in front
state
of them.
in the United States has contributed
You
to
know,
this
we
rocket,
can
so it
bitch
should be
and
no surprise
argue
that we have
about
people
the
from all
environment
over the country joining us here tonight. I'm
till
actually
we're black
joined by
and blue.
some friends of ours who are
But at
joining
the
us
end
from
of the day,
Georgia
we have
and
a mission to
Utah.
accomplish.
What does it mean to be here tonight to see tonight's launch?
I think it's
And
amazing.
I
I know
hope
that tons of
that
people from all
next
over the
month,
United States
when that
have helped
rocket
build the rockets and are here
attempt
tonight. So
is
it's awesome
made,
to know that we all have a little bit of
that the
personal ties to
community
the rocket.
shows its support.
And go ahead.
No, I'm just excited to be
Because
here
not
because
only
I've
are
been
we
a fan
talking
of
about
space travel
jobs,
and going to
good
the moon and
high-paying
back,
jobs
and, I'm
this
glad to see
area.
it's happening again.
It is
later
our
in life.
workforce that is
And
making
you were
it
actually telling
happen.
me a little bit earlier that you grew up in the Apollo era in those years following those first launches, and now here. How does it feel to
I
be
suspect
watching the
so.
sister program launch and seeing at the beginning?
I know that they're
Goosebumps.
going to
That
lose
tells it all right
communication
here.
as soon
I'm
as
totally
the
thrilled to be here.
Now, if you were
Orion
actually telling
capsule
me that you have
and
a
the
personal connection to
module
this rocket as well,
actually
you know some people who have
make
worked on it. What do you think it feels like being here? How does it feel
rendezvous
for you
towards
to
the
see
far side of
something
the
that's
moon.
the culmination of so many years
That
of
is
hard
where
work?
they will
Yeah, I
lose
think it's crazy when
communication.
you
I
think
think
about how
they
long it
mentioned
takes
about
to
8
build it and
hours
stuff.
or
Like I
so.
wasn't even born
So they'll
last time
be
people tried to get to the
incommunicado
moon. So
for at least
it's
8
awesome. I
hours
think it's so
while
exciting,
the
and I
Orion
cannot wait.
capsule
And we
makes
have
it
a ton of people who are working
behind the
tonight
moon.
still on
So
console. We
once
just
they
wanted to
get
tell
back
them words of encouragement. What more do
towards
you
where
have
we
to say?
can get signal
I hope
again,
this goes tonight.
then
Megan, back to you.
hopefully we'll get some broadcast pictures.
Go Artemis! Yes,
I mean,
love
I
that. And
expect
again, I
those
just love these
pictures and
drone
those
shots that
videos
we're
to be a
showing
hell of a
all
lot
the
better
people
than
who
what
are
we
here
got
ready, hoping,
during the Apollo era.
anticipating,
I mean, there were
launch
no
today.
iPhones
So now
back
let's
in
head
those
back over
days.
to Dan.
You know,
So Dan is in the
not to say
Apollo
that they're going to be
Satellite
using
Center, which is right
iPhones, right?
next
They probably
to
will.
this
Who knows,
crowd that
right?
you're seeing here.
But,
He's inside there, and he's going to tell us more about
but definitely,
SLS
I
using
expect
an
that we're going to
interactive
get some
state-of-the-art
video,
tool we're calling
some
the
really,
Moonboard.
really sharp
That's right,
video.
Megan. Everybody, welcome back
this
to the
time
moon
around,
board.
so.
So, just to recap, SLS
And we'll
out
finally
on
settle the
pad, on
question
mobile
for some of
launcher.
those
Daryl's been walking you through
deniers
all
out
of the
there that
tanking,
think
all of
the
the
moon was made out of
preparation. We had that
cheese.
hydrogen leak that was
We'll
in the
find
base
out
of
that
the
it
mobile
wasn't made
service
out of
structure here.
cheese.
That's been remedied. We haven't
Not
had
Swiss
any issue with
cheese,
those hill
not cottage
umbilicals that we were
cheese,
tracking so
not
closely
American
back in August,
cheese,
and September.
not
So everything
cheddar
looking really
cheese,
good with
and no
SLS.
queso
Just to
fresco
recap,
for those Mexicans
most
out
powerful
there.
rocket
So
we have ever built.
no hay
It's
nada de eso.
propelled by
It's going to
two
be
solid
nothing
rocket
but
boosters
lunar
and four
dust
engines
and
on this core
rocks.
stage.
So
Now these solid rocket
no
boosters are going
esperen
to be firing
a
for the
melted
first
cheese
roughly
sandwich.
2 minutes of the flight, a little more than 2 minutes, and we call them solids because of the type of propellant in there. If you forgot it
They're
already,
talking
it's
here
aluminum
about the
powder,
solid
ammonium
rocket
perchlorate,
boosters,
and
as I mentioned
polybutadiene
earlier in the
acrylonitrile.
show.
It's a binding
This
agent
is
that's
shuttle
inside.
technology.
Solid propellants are extremely stable. They're
It
very
is not a
reliable,
chemical
but
rocket.
once you
The
ignite
side
them, they're
rocket
gonna keep
boosters are
burning.
not
You can't really
chemical.
throttle
Like
them up and
they don't
down
use
like
liquid
you can with
oxygen or
liquid-fueled
hydrogen.
engines. You can
It's a
throttle
solid
just
propellant.
based off of the distribution.
So,
So you basically
once the
put more
propellant
propellant in some areas
exhausts,
and less
the
in
boosters
others as
separate,
you're trying to
and the
throttle the
4
rocket down, which we do as we
RS-25
go
rocket
through things
engines
like max Q,
will
maximum dynamic
take
pressure.
that
And just a reminder, as these things are
remaining
firing,
LOX
they can steer, they can
and
gimbal
hydrogen
the bottom part
and
here.
power
Gimbal
that
just
rocket
means you can
further
really
into
direct, and they're providing
space.
90% of the steering as SLS is making the flight uphill, and more than 75% of
me
the
raise up
thrust
the
with
volume.
those
This
two
guy
firing at
is
the same
explaining
time.
here
And again, they're attached to this. This is the
how
core
this
stage,
works.
212 feet tall, the largest single stage we've ever constructed. It's been through the green run test, a lot of preparation for this flight today, and it is propelled by these 4 RS-25 engines. Now these are liquid fueled rocket engines, so you have a fuel and an oxidizer, and one of the great things about liquid fuel is you can throttle them in real time. You could kind of like the gas in your car, you can go faster or a little bit slower. So these throttle up to 104% of their rated thrust at the time of liftoff. We throttle them down as we go through max Q, so the maximum amount of pressure on SLS in the way uphill, and then throttle them back up until they've consumed all of their propellants. And they're consuming that propellant at more than 1,500 gallons a second. That is just an astronomical amount of fuel that's running through these engines to produce that thrust. Each of these up to 500,000 pounds each during their operation. And of all the different components, we've got this engine block
By the
section
way,
down
for those
here.
of
You
you
have
that are
all of the
unaware, the
associated plumbing, everything to feed
engines
those
are the
propellants
same
down to these engines.
that
You also have these
powered
two
the
attachment
3
points
engines
here,
from the
and
space
that's where
shuttle.
we
If you
actually
recall,
tank
the
the
space
SLS
shuttle
rocket. So a lot of
used
focus on
3
those in the
engines
previous
in the back
attempts.
end.
They've cooperated spectacularly so far today, and we've been able to fully tank this core stage. And a reminder, you have a fuel, about 500,000 gallons right here of liquid hydrogen, and then an
500,000
oxidizer. You
of
need those
liquid
two
hydrogen.
together, and then an ignition source. That's what gives you your reaction, your
So they're
thrust,
mixed
your
together,
basically
and then
controlled
they're
explosion
ignited.
that then comes out of those rocket engines. So fully tanked, these are cryogenic fuels, hundreds of degrees below zero, so we've got a spray-on insulation across the entire vehicle. As it's sitting out there in the Florida air, it's a little bit warm tonight, but we need to keep those hundreds of degrees below zero. It takes a lot of energy to do that, so the less you have to use to keep them cold, the better, which is why we have that insulation. So we're gonna be seeing SLS take flight for the first time tonight as we clear all of those final issues. Again, this is going to be one heck of a show when this
this thing launches into the night sky. So with that, send it back over to you, Megan.
If you're just joining us, welcome to NASA's Kennedy Space Center for live launch coverage of Artemis 1. I'm NASA's Megan Cruz, and this is NASA astronaut Kayla Barron. It's been great having you these past 2 hours.
It's been so awesome to be here for this historic launch tonight.
So right now we are awaiting a new T0. The launch team had to work through some issues, and they're doing a great job at working through those issues. So now we're just waiting to see a new T0, since we had been aiming for the top of the launch window, which opened does open at 1:04 a.m. Eastern time. Now today is a big deal. Apollo 17 in 1972 was the last time humans stepped foot on the moon.
Launch window will
the rocket
open
you
up
see right there behind us, illuminated in the darkness there,
Central
is the
time.
first step back
so they've
towards
got a
getting
launch
us to
window
the moon.
between
Now Artemis 1 is the first integrated flight
AM
test of NASA's deep space
and
exploration
3
systems.
AM
That's the ground
Wednesday
systems here at
morning,
Kennedy Space
which is
Center, the Space Launch System, or
Wednesday in a
SLS
few
rocket, and the
minutes for
Orion
me,
spacecraft.
as well as
We will
for
send
most of you.
an uncrewed
Unless you
Orion
live in
spacecraft
California, right?
farther
But-
beyond the moon than any of the Apollo missions before it. For Artemis 2, Orion will have astronauts on board as it orbits the moon. Then future Artemis missions will land the first
So the
woman
next
and
launch
first person
will
of
be
color on
Artemis
the surface
2,
of the
which
moon.
will contain
So
astronauts.
Kayla, why do we want to go back to the moon?
I don't believe that
Moon's a
Artemis
super
2
interesting
is
place
going to
study. It can
land
tell us a lot
an
about
astronaut.
the Earth, its own
But at
formation,
least
but
they're
also
gonna
more
make
about
the
our solar
trip
system. And we also want to
towards the
return this
moon.
time in an
I
international
could be wrong.
partnership for a permanent presence on the lunar surface that'll teach us everything we need to know to travel onto Mars.
And what about for you? I mean, you have the possibility of maybe being selected for those future missions, because the Artemis program can choose from any of you guys, any of the NASA astronauts.
It's a crazy time to be a NASA astronaut and even imagine that that could be real. I think we're all just honored to be a part of the team that's doing this. We're just a small representation of all of the amazing human beings around the world that it takes to do something as audacious as returning to the moon, learning what we need to go onto Mars. So we're just all excited to support the program in any way we can. But of course, a ride to the moon would be incredible. So
Yeah.
I think we're all just dreaming about those moonwalks.
Now, since Artemis 1 is setting the stage for those future crewed missions, is there anything in particular about this 26-day mission that you will be watching? Is it re-entry?
Yeah, you know, we've mentioned that a few times throughout the broadcast tonight. The re-entry is a really important part of the flight, of course, and the heat shield, we're interested in seeing how it performs in real life. We've tested it on the ground, but Orion's going to be coming in faster and hotter than any human-rated spacecraft in history. And so we really want to see how the heat shield performs and make sure all the systems can keep the crew safe for that dynamic event.
Yeah, we'll all be watching for that too. It's not just about the launch, a 26-day mission, as we said, so we'll be keeping watch over the entire mission. Our workforce now is very different from what it was during the Apollo era. When Apollo 11 launched, there was only one female engineer in the firing room. Today's launch of Artemis 1 is led by NASA's first ever female launch director. Take a look at how she and other women across NASA are shattering glass ceilings.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to be an astronaut,
a scientist,
a doctor,
a fighter pilot.
When I was a little girl, I wanted to grow up to be strong and independent.
When we were asked to draw a picture of what we wanted to be when we grew up, I drew an astronaut standing on the surface of the moon.
All I thought about was when I was going to get to NASA.
It's a huge honor to be NASA's first female launch director. To be the launch director for Artemis, NASA has so many wonderful women pioneers, so many heroes to me.
Some of the most amazing women in my eyes are people like Katherine Johnson and the other women that you've seen in Hidden Figures.
Sometimes it's difficult to believe that I'm on this side now wearing this blue flight suit with all of the other astronauts, representing this iconic image that had so inspired and excited me my entire life.
Being of South Asian heritage, Kalpana Chawla was just such a big thing for me growing up.
I've always looked up to Sally Ride and Mae Jemison, who really laid the foundation to allow people like me to be in the position that I am now.
All of these women were pushing those boundaries and breaking those glass ceilings.
Now, of course, there are some fantastic women in leadership positions that inspire me every day.
So much has changed since the Apollo program. During the Apollo 11 launch, we had one woman, one out of 400 engineers in the room. And I look at our team today, it's much more a reflection of the world that we live in.
a big piece of why it's so important to have women and diverse backgrounds, because it allows us to bring everybody along with us on this journey.
It doesn't really matter what you look like. If you've got the brains and you have the knowledge, we need you at the table.
We are at such an exciting time in human spaceflight right now, and Artemis is such a huge part of that.
We haven't been to the moon in many, many years. We have a lot of younger generation folks that have never seen that happen.
We will understand so much more about the moon, about the Earth, about our solar system.
We're going to stay. And to me, that's an amazing idea. The moon is going to be the blueprint for how we go to Mars and out into the solar system and maybe beyond.
It is incredibly exciting to be part of this Artemis team. It still feels pretty surreal to think that I might one day walk on the moon.
To see a woman and a person of color on the surface of the moon, to be able to say that space is for everyone and that we go to space to make life better here on Earth for everyone. I know that tears will be in my eyes.
My message to women and girls out there is to find your passion, whatever that is.
Don't let anyone tell you what you can do or can't do. Only you can realize your dreams.
Space is for everyone. And if me being in this role helps to send that message, I think that's a great thing.
And I just actually love that I don't feel like a woman at NASA. I just feel like a person at NASA.
The women of NASA are Artemis, and we make a difference every day.
I am NASA's Spacewalk Office Hardware Manager. I'm the Program Scientist for Space Biology.
I'm the Director of NASA's Johnson Space Center.
I am Artemis.
I am Artemis.
私は Artemis です。Yo soy Artemis.
As some Artemis.
Anna.
Je suis.
Ich bin
I
Artemis.
am
Artemis.
I am Artemis.
I just love the way that that video ends with you and all these other women saying, I am Artemis. What do you think? Why is it so powerful to just hear those three words, I am Artemis? Why does that resonate so much?
I think it just represents how far we've come since the Apollo era and how we take advantage of the incredible diversity our country has to offer. Having seats at the table for everyone, you know, spaces for everyone. You heard that a few times in the video, and I think we're proving that out every single day in our work, not just at NASA, but with our international partners. I think it's so important to our ability to succeed on these really complex missions.
Yeah, I thought that was a very powerful video, and I'm glad that people got that message, young girls in particular. Another person who you saw in that video is Pam Melroy. She's a former astronaut and NASA's deputy administrator. So why don't we head over to Jasmine Hopkins, because Pam is there with her now.
Thank you so much, Megan. Yes, I am honored now to be joined by Pam Melroy, NASA Deputy Administrator. This is just a fantastic night. And we just saw that powerful video with you among so many of the great women here at NASA. What is so important about us now being ready to send, you know, the first woman, the first person of color to the moon?
Yeah, I loved watching that video. Just inspires me. So many of those women are my friends, but also they're just such fantastic engineers and scientists and just so many roles at the agency. I've always thought one of the strongest teams that you could ever find is a family, and families have men and women, and so our teams are stronger, I think, when we have that balance and that diversity. So that was exciting. But for me, I was a part of the Apollo generation, and I was very inspired by, you know, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin and Mike Collins on Apollo 11 and all the Apollo astronauts. I just cannot even imagine the inspiration, though, for a little girl. I mean, it never occurred to me that I wanted to be an astronaut, but of course there were no women astronauts then. I think what's going to happen now with the Artemis generation is that first woman and the first person of color is just going to have a huge impact on the next generation.
Right, we are just watching with bated breath, and I know that it's going to mean so much to little kids to look up to them. And we understand too, this is a huge, I mean, when we launch Artemis, it's going to be a global accomplishment. We have the Artemis Accords, which are helping us make sure we explore peacefully. Can you tell us more about those?
Yeah, it's really important, actually, especially because you know, unlike in Apollo, where it was actually just a few countries that had the capability to go to space, now those capabilities are proliferating throughout the world. And so what we do with the rocket is really important, and how we go is just as important. And how we go is as teams and with our partners and with a sense of the responsibility that we have as we go out into the solar system to do it peacefully for scientific purposes and responsibly.
Right. Pam, you have a great sense of teamwork, and this is definitely not our first time. You know, there's a lot of things that go into testing out a first-time vehicle. There's actually dynamic activity going on right now. So how does this first flight test of SLS compare to other first times, you know, with Shuttle or with Saturn V before that?
Well, I can do even better as a test pilot, right? So there's a history there. In fact, the amazing thing about this is so first flight of a first aircraft, you actually taxi it out to the end of the runway and then run down the runway and come back and check all the data. And then you might take off once and go around the pattern and come back and land. This is a little bit like taking off and going to fly a full mission on your very first flight of an aircraft. And so everything has to be right. So this compares it's very similar to the experiences that all new rocket developments have, where, it's not just about learning the hardware, that's a big piece of it, but it's also about gelling that team together and your procedures and how you're going to deal with issues that come up, because they will come up. They always come up.
Exactly. And you have that experience as a test pilot, but also as a former astronaut. In that video, we saw you getting your induction into the Astronaut Hall of Fame, which is pretty cool. So what is your perspective, or what advice do you have for the Artemis astronauts, those ones that are going to maybe set foot on the moon?
Oh, well, they don't need my advice. I'd love to elbow them out of the way and go to the moon too. But they are fantastic. I mean, I'm so proud of all of our astronauts. I was just talking to Jessica Watkins, who just came back on Crew 4. This generation is prepared, ready, and excited. And I think they're really excited that we're putting science front and center in the Artemis program too. We're going to learn so much about the solar system from the moon and even about the Earth. And so I think the astronauts are really excited about doing that hands-on science, and they are ready to go.
Right, I know they're ready to go, and maybe you are as well. But Artemis 1 is just the beginning. Then we have Artemis 2 and on. We're learning so much. What do you think about this forward movement that we're making right now?
Well, it's really important. This is the Artemis campaign is actually part of a multi-decade effort that we're doing right now, which is really with the goal of creating a blueprint for how we're going to explore with humans and do science throughout the solar system. So we're going to learn through the Artemis campaign on the moon, and then we're going to go demonstrate it on Mars, and then the next destination, who knows where.
Right. I mean, we're going so much further than we ever have before. Pam Melroy, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Go Artemis.
Of course, go Artemis. Megan, back to you.
Thank you both for that interview. Now, teams over at NASA's Johnson Space Center are also monitoring today's launch attempt. So why don't we go back over there with Leah to tell us what's going on over there.
Thanks, Megan. And you're right, teams here in Mission Control Houston continue to monitor today's events. Again, they will really kick into action once we have liftoff, and they'll remain on console all the way through splashdown. But quickly, I have to show you something, a little show and tell. It makes me feel like the coolest kid in school. I've got a moon rock here. I hope you can get a good shot of it. It is from Apollo 15, 1971. And when it was brought back to Earth, it was part of a larger rock. In total, it was 21 pounds. This is, of course, a smaller section of that. But we're looking forward to the Artemis program and being able to go back to the moon so that we can continue to gather these kinds of samples, but this time at the lunar South Pole. We've never been there, and we've never brought samples back from that area, so we're really excited to see what might differ in those samples and the ones that we have here. Now, of course, we've got a whole laboratory of scientists that are able to study all of those samples. We just opened some up for the first time earlier this year, so that we're able to test with new technology everything that we can learn about these samples that we brought back now 50 years ago. So hopefully within the next few years, we're bringing some new ones back to use that same experimental process on and tell us a little bit more about the moon. But just had to show this off. Apollo 15 moon rock. We're looking forward to having some Artemis ones here at Johnson Space Center. With that, I will send it back to you at KSC.
you were a cool kid before you even had the moon rock, so. But now you're even a cooler kid. Now, the name Artemis was chosen because in Greek mythology, she's the twin sister of Apollo. NASA's Leah Martin is over at the nearby Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex, where thousands have gathered to watch today's launch attempt.
Hi, Megan. I'm actually joined here tonight by a very special group of guests here from Stennis visiting Kennedy Space Center. Why don't you tell me, Ryan, what it is that ties you to tonight's launch?
So we were lucky and privileged enough to be able to test the core stage of the SLS rocket that's going to launch today. We got to green run, which is a full duration hot fire. It's a very historic time for us at Stennis. It was so exciting to be a part of. It was 7 years of hard work by a lot of really great people.
And Jack, sorry about
just so excited to be here to see it.
And Jack, you were actually telling me that you know firsthand, how much work has gone into tonight's launch. What does it feel like to be here tonight, seeing the rocket fully integrated on the pad, ready to go?
Man, I'm just incredibly grateful to be a part of this history and just really excited to see this thing launch.
And Barry, you were telling me that you know also firsthand, the adversity that these teams have overcome to be here tonight. Do you have a word of encouragement, anything that you'd like to say to the teams all across the United States right now, both at Kennedy and at JSC, who are just sitting in these seats ready to get the rocket launched tonight?
Sure, persevere. I mean, it's hard work, but it's so well worth it. We spent many hours doing the testing and trying to get ready for this moment, and I think we've forward that information to those guys, and we also give them the encouragement to continue on so we know they can do it.
Thanks so much, Barry, and I think it would be great if just on the count of three we can give them a great big go Artemis. 1, 2, 3.
Go Artemis!
Back to you, Megan.
That was amazing. And that's just, people who were actually able to come here to Florida. There's many people who are joining us from around the world who couldn't obviously make the trip out here. So let's take a look at some of those watch parties there. Here's Space Center Houston. It's the visitor center over for Johnson Space Center in Houston. And you can see a lot of people there after hours because you know that visitor center is closed right now. People are waving. I love it. Wow, look at that. Whatever that is, it's
awesome.
amazing.
I don't think I've ever noticed that when I'm at Space Center Houston. Maybe it's new.
I know, but yeah, just look at that crowd. It's really fun to see, again, all these people who are captivated, young and old, by today's launch attempt and the beginning of the Artemis program. I know that they're probably looking at the clock and wondering when we might see the launch today. So lovely to see all those people.
And there's the Space and Rocket Center, where we have a ton of people waving their flags, cheering us on tonight for this incredible launch this evening.
I love that. They totally look like cheerleaders, and they're embracing it. I love it. And yeah, this is the U.S. Space and Rocket Center. This is the visitor center over in Huntsville, Alabama. As I've said before, Marshall Space Flight Center there is super instrumental in what the Artemis program is doing. They contributed a lot to the mission, so it's nice to see everyone there. And then here is Airbus in Bremen, Germany. So Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together the company and ESA, they provided the European Service Module, which is an important part of the Orion spacecraft. So we have quite a bit of people there. A more reasonable time over there in Germany. It is 7 a.m. So I'm going to say Guten Morgen to them. Did I say it right? Guten Morgen to them over there in Bremen, Germany. Again, the Airbus company. All right, so let's get another check on the launch team with our Daryl Nail, who's inside there and has an update for us.
Yeah, that's right, Megan. So we are clearly in a delay now. The NASA test director, who's basically flying the ship for the launch countdown tonight, has said that we are extending the hold that we were currently in at T-minus 10 minutes and counting. And so that puts us off the 1:04 a.m. Eastern Time launch. We're now slipping indefinitely into the hold. And NASA Test Director Carlos Monge saying that we are currently estimating how much work needs to be done before resuming the polling that is supposed to take place 15 minutes before launch. It then goes to terminal count at T-minus 10 minutes. Now we've got an update on the tanking of the upper stage liquid hydrogen tank. Currently 95% filled. We're in topping on that tank. It is the last of 4 tanks in the Space Launch System that needed to be completely fueled up before we launch. Of course, cryogenic tanking, a complex operation that has seen some delays tonight. We had a roughly hour delay after a replenish valve on the core stage liquid hydrogen side required hands-on work by a Red Crew team that went out to the launch pad and tightened down some bolts on the valve and got it fixed before leaving the launch pad, and then launch team verifying that that work was complete. Now currently we're awaiting some work with the range. The 45th Space Wing, which oversees the range here, and makes sure that the airspace and the ocean out over the flight path is clear, and also has the responsibility to destruct the rocket should it go off track. They have been working on some issues with their equipment and sending a flight termination signal to the rocket. There is testing that must happen with the flight termination system that was delayed by a bad Ethernet switch. Switch has been changed out, and now the range is looking to start testing their connectivity to the rocket in order to preserve that safety function that they are responsible for. So again, we are slipping now indefinitely into the launch window. We're awaiting the launch team to evaluate just how much time is required to complete the work to get this rocket ready to launch. And of course, when we have a new T0 for you, we'll report that out right away. Megan, back to you.
Daryl, thank you so much. As NASA prepares to explore the moon, here's a look at the spacesuits and tools that will help us to do that.
Watching Apollo footage of astronauts doing geology on the surface of the moon is a really great way to think about preparing for Artemis, for putting people on the lunar surface once again. We learn a lot in how they did science operations on the moon and what it's like to work on the moon. You see them doing geology, you see them taking rock samples, putting in a drive tube to take a core sample, you see them bouncing along the surface of the moon on the lunar rover that they used in Apollo 15 through 17. So it's a great way to help drive technology development for the next generation of spacesuits and geology sampling tools.
There's these facilities that help us train like we are on the lunar surface. You know, these 1.6G offload systems or putting people in the aquatic environment are great ways to train the mobility part, right? Like, what can you do and how different does it feel to be in 1.6G and do these tasks?
We've been training astronauts in geology and geoscience for decades now. The Apollo astronauts had literally hundreds of hours of training in geology before they flew to the moon. It's often said that the Apollo astronauts had the equivalent of a master's degree in geology by the time they flew to the moon. In the intervening decades since Apollo, we've been training astronauts who fly to the International Space Station because when they're on the ISS, they spend time observing the Earth, looking out the window, taking pictures of what they see on the Earth's surface. Now that we're looking at putting astronauts on the surface of the moon, we also take them into the field. We take them to field sites here on Earth that resemble field sites that we expect them to see on the moon.
That's the reason why we take them out into places that are unique, like volcanic landscapes or places that are analogous to the lunar surface, to train them on the scale and fidelity of science that you just can't recreate in these facilities.
And so by combining this classroom and field training, we're able to prep them for fundamentals of geology, the major driving lunar science questions that we have that we hope to address with the Artemis program, and teaching them how to do field work in relevant analog environments.
For just science aspects of developing new spacesuits, can it get you to where you need to go? And then once you get there, can you do the cool science that you need to do? And so that's, can you move effectively and efficiently in the suit to be able to collect the samples or use the tools or the instruments For the visibility, it's like, can you make the necessary observations that you need to, or does the suit have the lights on it that it needs to illuminate the surface and make the observations you need to? The lunar South Pole holds tremendous resources that are going to allow us to continue to explore. This is a place that we've never been before. There's so much to be learned from getting boots on the ground and exploring a unique place that challenges us as humans and also helps us develop technologies that make our everyday life that much better.
We think there might be volatiles present at the South Pole. By using these volatiles, we'll be able to do things like create drinking water, create rocket fuel to launch astronauts back to Earth. And so by harnessing the power of the land, we'll be able to help astronauts establish that long-term sustainable presence.
It's human nature to explore. Pushing our boundaries and exploring our universe is, I think, just one of those things that's just stuck in our human nature, and that we need to do it in order to understand the world around us, including our Earth and our solar system.
We just heard there how curiosity is just a part of us. So, with that in mind, why don't we do some social questions? Because some people are very curious to hear what you have to say about their questions. So why don't we pull up the first question here? What are your thoughts on the responsibilities that come with going to space? Obviously a question for you. I am not going to space.
Yeah, the opportunity to travel to space comes with a lot of responsibility. I think for all of us, it's a huge honor to be a part of these teams, and the work we're doing is so critical in supporting scientific discovery on the ground. So on the International Space Station, we're a national laboratory. Our crew executed over 350 different scientific experiments during our 6-month mission. And so when you think about that, it's years of work to get one of these payloads or an experiment on the space station.
Yes.
And sometimes that's someone's life's work you're holding in your hands and executing. And so being prepared for those moments is really important, and understanding how to bring the team from the ground into solving complex problems. We take that really, really seriously. And of course, we want to share what that experience is like. Only a few people have been able to go to space. And as we commercialize space, as low Earth orbit becomes more accessible, that'll change. But still, it's only available to some of us. So we really want to share what that's like and the perspective we gain from our time up there.
It's really great to see and hear that you guys acknowledge that, right? Like that this experiment that you're holding, that you're working on for 6 months, somebody has been working on literally for years. I mean, I've talked to some scientists and they're saying, oh, this has been my life's work, 20 years of my life's work. So yeah, that was a really good question. I like that question a lot. Okay, we have another one from social media here. Astro Kayla, have you considered what you might say if you had the opportunity to be the first female to set foot on the moon's surface?
No, I have not considered that. If I was in that role, it's something I would take really seriously. I think the iconic words of Neil Armstrong, one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind, are something that we all know, whether you witnessed that moment or not, or it happened before you were born. For me, I think we all have that embedded in our psyche, those important words. So I think it's something I would have to think a lot about ahead of that mission.
Yeah, that would be in the history books. That'll be something you're remembered for. Oh my gosh, I'd be so anxious delivering it, even after I've thought of what I want to say, like to actually open my mouth and say it from the surface of the moon. Wow. Yeah. That we'll have to think about that one for sure. Okay, let's see another question here. Oh, why is the spacesuit orange in color?
That's an awesome question that I wish I knew the answer to. Megan and I were actually talking about that earlier when we had Snoopy up here. It's a continuation of the same suit that we used during the shuttle era. And I was kind of hypothesizing that maybe it's to help forces if for some reason when we landed in the water we had to get out of the capsule for some reason, it would be easy to see us. But that I'm gonna have to take a phone a friend on that one, I think, to know the real answer. I'm sure somebody will be commenting on social media right now with what the real history behind the orange suit is.
I'm trying to think about it too. I'm thinking, does it have anything to do with SLS being orange because of the foam
match
insulation?
Your vehicle.
Yeah,
why not?
Maybe it's that.
I don't know.
I don't know. We got stumped. That was our first one that we got stumped on. Do we have another question? All right. If you could name one of the moon's craters, What would you name it?
Oh man, what would you name it, Megan? I don't know. That's a big decision.
I thought you might say the name of your zero-G graph.
Oh, FOW? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's a pretty big responsibility, I think, to name these geological features. And a lot of the craters on the moon already have names. So
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some that maybe they haven't named, they're too small, or we haven't explored them yet. But a lot of them already do have names. Like, we're going to be exploring the edge of Shackleton Crater as part of Artemis mission. So a lot of them are already named and mapped.
Yeah. Thanks for throwing it back on me. I was like, I don't know. Do you think like our parents or husband or fiance are now upset that we didn't say them?
I don't know. I mean, I don't think so. I think they understand.
All right.
These are big decisions.
This is. All right. Last question here, for this segment at least. What will Orion do when it gets to the moon?
So for this mission, Artemis 1, it's actually going to orbit the moon and then go into a distant retrograde orbit. And so it'll get really close as 62 miles, and then go way past the moon and way deeper into space than we've ever been before. So yeah, the Orion vehicle will be checking out all of its systems. We're going to be analyzing that data from the ground, and then we're going to see that it can survive re-entry and a successful splashdown off the coast of San Diego.
Yeah, that was a good question too. Okay, well again, just keep those questions coming. You know, we are entering into this launch window, and we do have time, so we'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to try at least to answer most of your questions. So you've been hearing throughout the broadcast all the different science that returning to the moon will enable us to do. So there's actually something called the Prime 1 mining experiment, and that's going to robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface.
NASA's first Polar Resources ice mining experiment, also known as Prime 1, will robotically look for ice and other resources below the lunar surface. Thanks to data from spacecraft orbiting the moon, scientists believe that the polar regions contain water ice in the form of ice just below the surface.
Alrighty, folks, it is 12:24 midnight, and the clock is on hold for 10 minutes, the T-minus 10 minutes. They're still checking things out at mission control as far as the launch of whether it's still a go or a no-go. So we're going to hang on here until we get a final determination whether the launch is going to happen. Like I said, there's been a few stumbles along the way. Throughout the evening, they encountered a valve leak earlier today. Earlier in the evening, about an hour or so from launch, they had to make a decision to send out the red team. It's a specialized team that ends up going to the launch pad, and the red team was sent out to launch pad 39B, where they attempted to retighten some bolts on that valve. It appears that they were successful, but obviously a 15-minute job that they anticipated took about an hour, and as a result of that, some of the things like bleeding the engines and restocking the rocket with fuel is something they had to restart over. So the last that I saw here was that 95% of the rocket was filled with hydrogen. So we'll see here. Here's a view of the rocket. Let's go ahead and raise the volume a little bit and see if they.
Hey, thanks, Megan. Everybody, welcome back to the moon board. There's a lot of people here in the complex.
Updates.
I just heard a woohoo. People are getting in and out because we have a great view of launch when it's going to happen, and it's going to happen today. But that launch is just the first step in the Artemis 1 mission. So
This
let's
is
look at
a
what's ahead
specialist
for this
that is
historic first
describing
flight.
the
As we
actual
just said,
launch
launch
as it's
is
gonna
step
happen.
number 1. Those 4 RS-25 engines throttle up, followed shortly after by the 2 solid rocket boosters igniting, sending SLS
Man,
and
I'm gonna
Orion
be like a
skyward.
walking
Now,
zombie
on our way
tomorrow.
uphill, we'll have a number of jettison events. You'll be able to see things coming off of the SLS rocket. One of the most
We're
visual
actually
ones will be
at
these 2 solid
2
rocket
hours
boosters. Now they'll expend
and
their propellant a little
25
over 2 minutes into the
minutes in
flight. They will
total
separate. We'll see
for
them flare off
broadcasting
onto
this
either
event.
side, and then the core stage continues
what we're
to fire.
probably gonna
We're also
do
going to
from
see
a
the
recording
launch abort system come
standpoint,
off the top. Once you get high enough in the atmosphere, it's no longer required. You can
hard
actually
drive
do
recording
aborts
is
using
we
engines
probably
on
will
Orion
stop
and its service
physical
module.
recording
I will also note that
to
on the launch
minimize
abort system, it's got
storage
those 3
capacity
solid rocket
on our
motors. The
servers.
jettison motor is active. The
We'll
abort and the attitude
probably
ones are
come
not for
back
this flight.
and
We don't have people, so we're not
combine
flying a fully active
and
abort
have
system.
to
We
re-edit,
also have 3 fairings that are
the
there to
video
protect
somewhat
Orion,
for
the service
viewing,
module, and the
but
crew
we
module
are
as
getting
we're flying up through the
to
really dense parts
the
of the
3-hour
Earth's
threshold,
atmosphere.
so we're hoping
Next up,
that
we'll
we don't
hit
have to
core
go into an
stage
edit mode, but
separation.
if
So
we
we've
do,
got 4 main
we will
engines. We'll hear
definitely
MECO,
have
main engine cutoff. Those engines will shut down. The core stage will
a edited
separate,
version
drop
of this
away.
show
It's eventually going to splash down in the
sometime
ocean.
tomorrow.
That hands over the propulsion duties to this, our upper stage, the Interim Cryogenic Propulsion Stage, or ICPS. Its first job is to execute what's known as a perigee raise maneuver. So the perigee is the lowest part of your orbit. You have a perigee, that's your low part, and an apogee, that's your highest point. We're going to raise up the perigee, and that's going to actually put us in a nice circular path around the planet. And while we're there, that gives us time to check out Orion. We're flying it in space for the second time, the first time in this fully integrated stack with SLS. We'll be able to look at all of Orion's systems, make sure those solar arrays are capturing the sun's energy and turning it into electrical power for Orion's systems, make sure the communications are working, all of our guidance, navigation, and control. That is your time to make sure you have a healthy spacecraft before you do something that is going to send it to the moon. And that's next up on our list. That's the trans-lunar injection. For today's launch profile, that's going to be a firing of about 18 minutes of that single engine on the upper stage. Now that engine optimized for a vacuum, it's producing about 24,000 pounds of thrust. So it's a pretty big engine, and it's doing that because we need enough energy to be able to send our payload, Orion, beyond low Earth orbit and send it on a path to head out to the moon. Now after that burn is complete, ICPS separates. It's going to do what's called a disposal burn. So it's going to send itself on a path from Earth around the moon and slingshot out into what's known as a heliocentric orbit. So it's going to completely leave the Earth-Moon system and go into orbit around our sun. But after it separates, propulsion duties get handed over to this, the European Service Module, and it's got a couple of different engines that it's going to be using, and we're going to be testing those out just on day 1. We're going to do what's called the Outbound Trajectory Correction Burn 1. And we'll do a couple of these trajectory corrections as we're flying out to the moon, but that first one is that first critical test of this large engine, the Orbital Maneuvering System engine. That's the one that has the most thrust, generating about 6,000 pounds of force in a vacuum, and that's what's going to be doing a lot of our maneuvers, or giving us that pushing power as we do these maneuvers around the moon to enter into what's known as Distant Retrograde Orbit, or DRO. And that's this dotted line that you see around here. Now we call it distant basically because of the distance we're away from the moon. We're about 40,000 miles, a little bit less, off the lunar surface. And then we call it retrograde because the moon orbiting planet Earth in this direction, going in a counterclockwise fashion, we're going to be entering into a clockwise orbit around the moon, opposite retrograde. Now to do that, we're going to get in close, we're going to dip in off the lunar surface. We're going to be about 80 miles, 80 statute miles off the lunar surface as we do this outbound powered flyby. Again, the major thrust coming from that Orbital Maneuvering System engine. After we do that, we'll do a final maneuver to actually go into that distant retrograde orbit, that DRO. Now, why DRO? Why are we not just going around the moon and coming back on like a free return trajectory, which we did on some of the Apollo missions? Well, in DRO, it's a very stable orbit. It doesn't require a lot of fuel to maintain that area around the moon. So it gives you a lot of time to really test the spacecraft. If you followed with any launch of a new spacecraft, you know there's only so much testing you can do on the ground. Once you actually put all of that hardware in space, in the environment that it's going to be operating, hundreds of thousands of miles away from Earth, you're going to learn things you didn't even realize about everything from communications, the life support systems, the thermal control. Everything on a spacecraft needs to get put through its paces in this environment before we put people on board, and that's why we're heading out to DRO. Eventually, though, it's going to be time to come home, and we will do a DRO departure maneuver. This, again, firing up that orbital maneuvering system engine and others on the service module, and this is what's going to commit us from leaving the moon and heading on back towards Earth. We'll dip in once more, close off the lunar surface, slingshot and use the lunar gravity to do this return-powered flyby, and then, similar to the way out, we can make correction burns as we kind of fine-tune our path back towards the Earth. And then it's time for re-entry. A couple of things happen before that. One of the really critical ones, spacecraft separation. We're going to detach the European service module shortly before re-entry. Its job largely done. That burns up in the Earth's atmosphere and reveals on the crew module the heat shield. I circled it earlier. This is goal number 1 of the Artemis mission. Artemis 1 mission is testing this heat shield at lunar return velocities, because when we make that trip around the moon and we come back, we are going in speeds of excess of 20,000 miles an hour. So when we slam into the Earth's atmosphere, it's going to heat that thing up to more than 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. For the Artemis 1 profile, we're going to do what's known as a skip re-entry. So basically, you can come in too shallow and skip off the atmosphere, too narrow, and you're going to do what's known as a ballistic entry, which really heats things up. We're going to do kind of a mix where we're going to skip once off the atmosphere, and that we're still going to get the heat, but that helps to reduce some of the G loads on the crew. Once you're through that, you get to parachute deploy. There's 11 parachutes in total that are going to slow Orion down before it splashes down. We're going to be going from 20,000 miles an hour to about 300 miles an hour before those parachutes deploy, and then they do a final job of getting it in the water in the South Pacific. We've got these big orange balloons. That's an uprighting system, so even if Orion landed in the water upside down, those can inflate, and they put us back upright into what's known as stable 1. That's where you want your spacecraft to be, nice and upright in the water, especially if you're an astronaut in there floating. Now, we also have a large U.S. Navy ship with a big bay that's going to basically come up and swallow Orion into its deck, and you've got a couple of other assets in the area to help recover hardware, the forward bay cover, parachutes, things like that. But that's scheduled to happen 26 days after a launch today. So that's 26 days from liftoff here in Florida around the moon to a splashdown in the Pacific, and that will be the first mission in the Artemis program, the farthest we've ever sent a human-rated spacecraft in history, and just the first step before we put people on board. So that's a look at everything still to come. We're counting down to that launch. I'll send it back over to Megan and the team at the host desk, guys.
A very comprehensive look at that. Thank you so much, Dan. If you're just joining us, welcome to Kennedy Space Center and our live coverage of Artemis 1, an uncrewed flight test that will return us to the moon in nearly 50 years. But you know, some might ask, why the moon? Well, here's why.
We are going. The history of this agency is marked with broken barriers, once viewed as impossible, with science fiction turned reality, with innovations that have spun industries all their own, and with demonstrations of peace for all humankind.
We soar in the skies of our home planet. We maintain a human presence just outside of gravity, and we touch points all across the solar system and beyond. We're going back to the moon, and this is why.
The moon is a treasure trove of science.
It holds opportunities for us to make discoveries about our home planet, about our sun,
and about our solar system.
The wealth of knowledge to be gleaned from the moon will inspire a new generation of thought and action.
Without fail, every major program and mission NASA has invested in has led to technologies and capabilities that have shaped our culture.
The breakthroughs of the Artemis era will define our generation and the generations to follow.
The tens of thousands of jobs associated with propelling us to the moon today are just the beginning of a lunar economy that will see hundreds of thousands of new jobs develop around the world.
This is not an ambition of one entity or one country. The exploration of the moon is a shared effort,
woven together by a desire for the greater good.
Why the moon? Because the missions of tomorrow will be sparked by the accomplishments of the Artemis generation today.
Because the ambition to go has already begun.
And because Mars is calling. We need to learn what it takes to establish a community on another cosmic shore. So let's camp close before pushing out.
And so, we go to the moon now, not as a series of isolated missions, but to build a community on and around the moon capable of proving how to live on other worlds.
We'll use the lessons from more than 50 years of peaceful exploration to send a new generation to the lunar surface to stay.
We will anchor our efforts on the lunar South Pole to establish the Artemis Base Camp,
positioning us for long-term science and exploration of the lunar surface.
We will prove what it takes to assemble a complex ship in deep space.
We will perfect descending down to and returning from a distant surface.
We will learn how humans can survive and thrive in a partial gravity environment.
With improved spacesuit designs, mobile habitats, and with reconnaissance robots pre-positioning and relocating supplies.
We will learn how to utilize the resources we find on these other worlds, starting with finding water ice and purifying it into drinkable water.
And refining that into hydrogen for fuel and oxygen to breathe.
We will establish fission power plants on the surface of the moon, capable of supporting a growing community of efforts.
And we will expand the logistics supply chain to enable commercial and international partners
to resupply and refuel deep space outposts.
None of this is simple or easy, but nothing in our history ever has been.
The Eagle has landed. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Thanks a lot.
This kind of continuous lunar presence is a natural extension of all that we've learned in low Earth orbit. And what we will accomplish there will ensure the monumental missions to Mars are within reach. As we ready the launch of the first Artemis mission, and as commercial companies ready their lunar landers for the first private payload deliveries, we have already begun to take the next step.
Throughout this launch broadcast, our NASA's Leah Martin has been introducing us to people over at the Kennedy Space Center Visitor Complex who have come out for hopefully the maiden voyage of Artemis 1. People from near and far, young and old, just really excited to hopefully see this historic flight. So now she's joined by somebody else who has a really interesting story. Leah, tell us about it.
Megan, I think one of the most exciting things about being here tonight is being with people who are like-minded, who have such a strong tie to the history of our nation's space program and their love of spaceflight. And I actually struck up an amazing conversation with Scott here, and you were telling me about the special tie that you have to tonight's launch as well.
Oh yeah, I literally grew up with NASA. My father went to work with the NACA before NASA, went to work for Dr. Von Braun, followed him over to Marshall Space Flight Center, and became, when it became NASA, he worked on the Jupiter C, Redstone, Saturn 1, Saturn 5, and then because of that, he brought me here to see Apollo 11 launch. So that was my first launch. I was 5 years old. I loved it. Still remember the sound. That's about all. And then years later, through my flying career, I was able to bring my sons back with my friends that flew the shuttle, and they saw 5 launches, and 4 landings. But basically, I wanted to be here. I was here for the first moon launch, the last moon launch back when Uncle Gene Cernan, our family friend, went to on Apollo 17. So I wanted to be here for this because it's kind of in our family, in our blood, and hopefully I'll be around for the next one when we go and land again. So that's
incredible. So you have NASA actually in your DNA, grew up with the program.
Yeah. I knew most of the German scientists. The kids sat in our lap, Dr. Ernst Stirlinger, and my father flew with von Braun because he was a general aviation pilot as well. So they'd get off work and fly, and they were in Life magazine together, National Geographic. So it was fun. I literally got to knew Al Shepard, all the Mercury, Gemini, Apollo guys, and it was an honor. I would have loved to have been an astronaut, but I went a different route, and but I can still come here and see them.
We can, and we're so grateful, so thrilled to see you here tonight, and so excited that you will be able to actually compare the last launch and the sound of the last one with the one tonight. It's absolutely going to rock the sky.
I want it to be even louder. I want to feel it. Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for joining us tonight. It's been an honor to meet you, and Megan, we're going back to you.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing that. That was such a fun story. Here we are now at Space Center Houston. This is a live look inside of the visitor center there. Lots of people hoping to see the launch today. I love this guy in the front with his NASA shirt representing. And again, just seeing children and young and old, just all these people who feel captivated and are excited about our next giant leap into deep space. So glad to have them here. Oh my gosh, I love this.
Yeah, the team in Marshall and Huntsville there is always ready for their shot, waving their flags. They're super pumped. That's the home to the SLS program office, so they have a dog in the fight tonight, seeing Artemis launch for the first time.
Is that an inflatable astronaut in the center? Do you see that? I think somebody is dressed up as an astronaut.
Look at that.
Yeah,
they're
representing.
Ready to go.
I love this. Yeah, I'm so glad that they're there. Again, these visitor centers are closed to the public, but you know, the people there decided to hold a watch party, and
look,
that's
our
exciting
friends in
to see.
Germany are ready for us this time.
I know,
they anticipated the delay. They look pumped and ready to go.
So these are employees of Airbus. Airbus is the main contractor for the European Space Agency, and together they provided the European service module for the Orion spacecraft. So really, we should be applauding them. They shouldn't be applauding. Thank you so much, guys, for your contribution to the program, and can't wait to see Orion and SLS launch. Okay, so now let's head back over to Daryl Nail over with the launch team so we can hear any updates about a new T0.
Yeah, Megan, thank you. And a clearer picture is starting to emerge as the launch team now reports out that they only have a few minutes left of work to do before they're ready to pick up polling. And we're also hearing that some of that polling, which kicks off with the mission management team, is also now just about 3.5 minutes away. Now, we are currently still in that hold, but the launch team, NASA's test director, is continuing to move the team forward. We've wrapped up work on the upper stage and the lower stage. You're looking now live inside Firing Room 1, where Launch Director Charlie Blackwell Thompson is overseeing her launch team. We've had a number of delays that have put us off the T0, but we are starting to track to a T0 close to around a quarter till, top of the hour. But we do need to have some polling that takes place. I'm pausing now because I'm listening in to the teams as they communicate. In this launch window, which we're currently 26 minutes into, and it's 2 hours long, it runs until 3:04 a.m. Eastern Time. We have what's called 40 cutouts. And in those cutouts, they range from about a second to about a minute. These are times where they can't launch. These cutouts must be accounted for when determining a new T0. The upper stage of the rocket, which was the last to get ready and configured. Just recently, the team cycled the liquid hydrogen valves, which is required. And they are currently working on the LO2 valves, liquid oxygen valves in the upper stage. That work is almost done.
Alrighty, they've got a few more minor...
We are now a minute and a half away from the pole of the mission management team.
We're about a minute
which is several
away
minutes
from the
before
polling.
T-minus 15 minutes.
So hopefully we'll start seeing...
When that poll starts, we'll get a clearer picture of our T0.
All right, we're waiting for a T0. It's been a long evening, guys. Longest podcast I've ever done.
NASA's test director has informed the launch team to all switch to a common communication channel. It's called 232. And what this means is that the entire launch team is now on one channel, and all future communication will happen there, whereas there are many channels. Now they reduce it down to one.
So we're waiting a new T0 here.
Just heard from NASA test director Carlos Monge. I'm sorry, Jeff Spaulding. Jeff Spaulding's on. They swapped out. There are currently no constraints to launch.
No constraints
Great
to
news.
launch, folks. This
Again,
is great news.
No constraints to launch. And they're getting ready to pick up with a poll to determine readiness for launch.
They are about to determine readiness for launch.
Okay, NASA test director Jeff Spaulding getting ready to conduct the readiness poll, so we are getting close.
The flight director is...
We're going to pull up the audio now.
Doing a polling for readiness for launch.
So that you can listen in.
LPs go. And rock. Rockets go. All right, copy all. And Launch Director NTD, our launch team is ready to proceed at this time.
I copy all NTD. At this time, I will proceed with my poll. And attention on 232, this is the Launch Director performing the final poll for launch. Verify no constraints and go for launch. EGS Program Chief Engineer.
EGS Program Chief Engineer verifies that the EGS, SLS, and Orion Program Chief Engineers have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, Greg. Thank you. EGS Chief Safety Officer.
The EGS CSO verifies the SLS, Orion, and EGS CSOs have no constraints and are go for launch.
Copy, John. Thank you. Range weather.
Weather has no constraints and weather is go for launch.
Copy LWO and Mission Manager. And Mission Manager, Launch Director.
Launch Director, Mission Manager on 232. The mission management team has been polled. You have a go to proceed with terminal count and launch of Artemis 1.
I copy all. Thank you. And NTD, Launch Director.
Go ahead, Launch Director.
Yes, sir. On behalf of all the men and women across our great nation who have worked to bring this hardware together to make this day possible, and for the Artemis generation, this is for you. At this time, I give you a go to resume count and launch Artemis 1.
We are ready to go, guys.
And thank you. All right, we do have a couple of steps to configure, and then we will be ready to resume the clock. CVSE, NTD.
CVSC here.
Initiate recording of Orion cameras at this time.
In work.
NTD.
RSR here.
Perform the booster ignition SNA arm rotation enable.
NDT, RSR, booster ignition SNA arm and rotation enable is complete.
And I copy. Thank you.
Okay, so there you heard the poll from Launch Director.
Early.
Getting ready to get that new T0 time. The poll that you heard was the NASA Test Director's poll. And
all right, and we have verified no cutouts at this time. And all personnel, we are going to resume the clock. GLS, you can resume the clock on your mark.
GLS copies. Countdown clock will resume on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. GLS mainline has been initiated.
Okay.
T-minus 10 minutes and counting.
We are T-minus 10 minutes away from liftoff of Artemis 1. As you can see, the clock is now moving. Let's put that up. T-minus 9 minutes.
We are 10 minutes away from launch of Artemis 1, folks. It's been a long evening, but we are on our way back to the moon. It is an exciting time to be alive. I may have not been there for the first, but I'm sure here now. We are getting ready, folks. We are headed on the way to the moon, and it is exciting. Barring any last-minute complications, I seriously doubt.
9 minutes away.
9 minutes away.
So terminal count.
This is great.
Control has been given over to the GLS, the ground launch sequencer, a computer and software that is doing all of the commanding and monitoring
8 minutes
of the
and
space launch system.
52 seconds to go.
We'll hear call
and
outs
I'm
from
gonna
the GLS
see
operator,
this happen.
Alex
in
Pandalos.
A total of 3 hours of recording and transmitting,
as well as NASA Test Director Jeff Spaulding. GLS is pre-tensioning the umbilicals at this very moment. You can see them as they run down the rocket. That's getting them ready to detach. At liftoff, those arms will swing away. We'll let go of the rocket in a clockwise direction.
I've waited 3 months for this.
T-minus 8 minutes and counting.
3 months. I have advertised this launch for 3
performing
months.
up to 100 commands per second, including configuring ground systems for power transfer to the rocket. GLS is turning on cameras, recording video inside and outside the crew module to collect data for engineers. Purging the aft skirt booster with high flow nitrogen. Clear out any hydrogen gas that may be there.
Raise the volume slightly here.
You can see the crew access arm is already retracted. When there is crew during Artemis 2, it would happen at T-minus 6 minutes. But out of abundance of caution, they went ahead and retracted the arm well ahead of liftoff.
That's good news. 6 minutes and
Want to point your
51
attention to the
seconds
base
to
of the
go.
mobile launcher. If something wasn't done to reduce the power from the pressure caused by the rocket's ignition and thunderous sound, it could damage the rocket. So the ignition overpressure and sound suppression system will flood the mobile launcher with water. You'll see that sequence start at T-minus 17 seconds. Now coming up in less than 30 seconds, the ground launch sequencer will start bringing the high energy systems online, starting with core stage pressurization. Firing Room 1 is completely silent as they listen for the next call.
GLS is go for core stage tank pressurization.
The core stage tank is now pressurizing to flight levels. The replenish valve to the liquid hydrogen tank now closing. The liquid oxygen tank will come a little later. Now we're arming the Orion ascent pyros and transfer to internal power. The launch abort system, or LAS jettison motor, is now armed. On this flight, the abort motor is inactive because there is no crew on board. Up next is the flight termination system, or FTS, which gives the Space Force the ability to destruct the rocket if it goes in the wrong direction. Let's listen in for that.
GLS is go for FTS arm.
The flight termination system is now armed. Coming up at 4 minutes and 40 seconds, a big moment. This is where the RS-25 engines and their bleed go to high flow. It's been a little tricky to dial in.
GLS is go for LH2 high flow bleed check.
Good word, we've passed that. The cryo team got the LH2 engine bleed pressure loop dialed in. They are now at the right temperature for launch. Countdown continues. T-minus 4 minutes, 15 seconds. Up next, GLS fires up the KPUs. Those are high-speed turbines which provide pressure to hydraulic pumps that steer the RS-25s. Stands for Core Stage Auxiliary Power Unit Start.
GLS is go for core stage APU start.
That now leads to the thrust vector control test at T-minus 2 minutes and 30 seconds. That can proceed now, and we will see the engines gimbal at the bottom of the core stage. At T-minus 3 minutes and 10 seconds, you will hear the go for purge sequence 4. That's a helium purge of the 4 core stage engines downstream of the propellant valve, getting the air and moisture out.
GLS is go for purge sequence 4.
And in just a few seconds, GLS will close the core stage LOX vent, liquid oxygen. The white vapor cloud caused from the super cold gaseous oxygen condensing the water in the atmosphere will disappear. You see it coming out there now. And there it goes, it's closed. LOX vent closed, pressure rising in the core stage LOX tank to flight levels. Coming up in 15 seconds, look for that thrust vector control actuator test. Engines will gimbal. And there they go. The 4 core stage RS-25 engines gimbaling around, testing the ability to steer the rocket into space. They will operate at 109% performance. Each RS-25 throwing down 500,000 pounds of thrust. All 4, 2 million pounds. All together with the boosters, 8.8 million pounds of thrust.
GLS is go for upper stage to internal power.
Now the upper stage has gone to internal power. So power is removed from the rocket's upper stage, the ICPS, and it's been switched to battery power. The same milestone is coming up for the core stage at T-minus 1 minute and 30 seconds.
GLS go for core stage to internal power.
The rocket's core stage, which houses the 3 flight computers, is now on battery power. So there is no more hold time available because there's no more margin on the batteries. So if we have a hold, we'd have to recycle back to T-minus 10 minutes and recharge those batteries. The count continues. A note now, shortly after liftoff.
1 minute.
Shortly after liftoff, Mission Control Houston will take control of the rocket, and my colleague, Leah Cheshire, will take over commentary. T-minus 50 seconds and counting. Coming up at T-minus 33 seconds, the GLS will hand off control to the ALS. This is the autonomous launch sequencer. On board the rocket, it will take over command and control of the rocket. But the ALS will check, make sure there's no holds coming from the ground up until T-minus 2 seconds.
GLS is go for ALS.
And we are go for ALS. The Space Launch System is now counting down to liftoff of Orion on its maiden voyage to the moon. Launch team can no longer recycle the count. Sound suppressor water now flowing under the ML. And here we go.
10.
Hydrogen burn-off igniters initiated. 7, 6, 5. Core stage engine start. 3, 2, 1. Boosters in ignition. And liftoff of Artemis 1. We rise together back to the moon and beyond.
And there we go, guys. Artemis 1
4 RS-25 engines on the
launched
core stage
and is
solid
headed
boosters
towards
now
the
propelling
moon.
the vehicle at 128 miles per hour.
What a great sight. What a great time for this country to be back.
Good control on the roll from teams in Mission Control Houston.
It's
All
an
good calls so
exciting
far.
time.
Now 30 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. First milestone will be for the vehicle to pass through max Q at about 1 minute and 9 seconds into launch. This is the greatest period of atmospheric force on the rocket. SLS now traveling 607 miles per hour. You're looking at 8.8 million pounds of maximum thrust. Quiet here in the loops in Mission Control. The 4 core stage engines are throttling down ahead of passing through max Q.
What a sight. What a sight.
Now 1 minute, 21 seconds into the flight, traveling at 1,420 miles per hour. The 4 core stage engines are back at maximum thrust. The next major milestone will be for the solid rocket boosters to cut off and jettison at about 2 minutes and 11 seconds into the flight, so about 30 seconds from now. Again, quiet here in Mission Control Houston as teams continue monitoring the flight of Artemis 1. We're now 16 miles downrange from the launch pad at Kennedy Space Center, traveling over 2,800 miles per hour. Standing by for solid rocket booster jettison and shortly thereafter. Confirmation that the solid rocket boosters have separated these 177-foot boosters. Now the core stage continues to power the flight of Orion, all 4 RS-25 engines firing, traveling over 3,400 miles per hour, 46 miles downrange. 2 minutes and 36 seconds into the flight. Hearing nominal calls here in Mission Control Houston. We've still got 4 good engines on the core stage. Next up, we'll be looking for the service module fairing to separate. This is 3 15 by 15 foot fairing panels, providing structural support, protecting the service module. Those will separate at about 3 minutes and 11 seconds into flight, and very shortly thereafter will be followed by the launch abort system separation. Just over 3 minutes into the flight of Artemis 1, now traveling over 4,060 miles per hour, 83 miles downrange.
It is great to watch.
We just had
this,
confirmation
guys.
that the service module fairing has separated.
The service module has separated.
And that the launch abort system pyros have fired, separating those from Orion as well. For future crew members, we just heard the call for 3-engine press, meaning if SLS were to lose an engine at this point in the mission, we could still achieve a nominal mission. We would just have an extended main engine cutoff time. However, we still have 4 good engines, all at maximum thrust right now, powering the first flight of Artemis at 5,200 miles per hour, 148 miles downrange.
Alrighty, folks. This concludes the special broadcast episode of the launch of Artemis 1.
We're 4 minutes and 16 seconds into the flight of Artemis 1. So far, we've had a clean ascent.
So I thank those that are still watching. I know that it was a long evening, but this was 3 months overdue, and I'm glad it happened. So we're back to the moon again, folks. Thank you for watching, and we'll be back later on this week with some Black Friday episodes. But I think for tonight, I'm going to try to get what little sleep I can. And Mr. Villarreal, thank you for all your comments tonight. It was definitely fun having you on, and get some sleep. You've got work tomorrow, and so do I. Good night, everybody.